97% of people freeze when violence erupts around them. They duck, they run, they call for help, but they don't step forward. They don't place their own body between a broken bottle and a child's face. At 11:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Friday night in Little Italy, Maya Chen did exactly that. The crash of breaking glass cut through the ambient noise of Giuseppe's restaurant like a blade through silk. Maya had been wiping down table 12 when the drunk businessman in the $2,000 suit decided that an 8-year-old boy walking past his table was somehow responsible for his fourth whiskey, sour, being weak. The man's face was flushed red with alcohol and rage, his tie askew, his expensive watch catching the amber light as he lunged forward with the jagged remains of his tumbler. Maya didn't think. She moved. Her body slammed between the drunk and the child, her forearms raised instinctively to shield the boy's face. The broken glass bit deep into her skin, drawing immediate lines of crimson across the pale undersides of her arms. The pain was sharp, familiar. She'd felt worse. "Get behind me," she whispered to the boy in Italian, her voice steady despite the blood now dripping onto her stained apron. "Stai dietro di me, piccolo." The child obeyed without hesitation, his small hands gripping the fabric of her uniform as the drunk swayed above them, still clutching the jagged glass like a weapon. Maya's brown eyes never left the man's face. She didn't flinch, she didn't blink. She simply stood there, a 24-year-old waitress in a $15 polyester uniform, bleeding and protecting someone else's child from a man who could probably buy the entire restaurant. "You crazy bitch," the drunk slurred, spittle flying from his lips. "Do you know who I am? I could buy and sell you 10 times over." "I'm sure you could," Maya replied, her voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from staring down worse men than him in darker places than this. "But right now, you're just a drunk who tried to hurt a child, so why don't you sit down and let me call you a cab?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What Maya didn't know was that the well-dressed man sitting alone at table 18, the one who had been cutting his osso buco with surgical precision while keeping one eye on his son's exploration of the restaurant, was now watching her with the intensity of a predator recognizing another apex creature. Luca Romano had been observing his 8-year-old boy Carlo's interaction with the kind waitress all evening, noting how she had slipped Carlo an extra bread roll without being asked, how she had crouched down to Carlo's eye level when taking his order, how she had smiled when Carlo had whispered his thank you in the halting Italian he was still learning. But now, seeing this small woman bleeding to protect his child, something shifted in Luca's chest, something that had been locked away since his wife's funeral 2 years ago. Maya was still standing her ground, the drunk now stumbling backward as other patrons began to notice the commotion. Giuseppe himself emerged from behind the bar, his face red with embarrassment and fury, already reaching for the phone to call the police. The drunk seemed to finally register the amount of blood on Maya's arms and the fact that a restaurant full of people was now staring at him, with expressions ranging from disgust to barely contained violence. "This isn't over," the drunk muttered, dropping the broken glass onto the floor with a sharp clink. "I'll have your job for this." "Good luck with that," Maya said quietly, already kneeling down to check on the boy. "Carlo, say a posto. Are you okay, sweetheart?" The child nodded mutely, his large dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something that looked suspiciously like admiration. Maya pulled a clean napkin from her apron pocket and gently wiped a small speck of blood from Carlo's cheek where a tiny glass fragment had grazed him. "It's just a little scratch," she murmured, her voice gentle and reassuring. "Your papa is right over there, and you're safe now. Tutto ben, tutto ben." That was when Carlo spoke for the first time in 6 months. "Grazie, Maya." The words were barely above a whisper, but they cut through the restaurant noise like a gunshot. Maya's eyes widened in surprise, not just because the boy had spoken, but because he had remembered her name from her introduction at the beginning of his meal. She glanced up toward table 18 and met the intense gaze of Carlo's father for the first time that evening. Luca Romano was not a man who showed emotion easily. His face was carved from marble, his dark eyes unreadable, his posture that of someone accustomed to command. But something flickered across his features as he watched Maya tend to his son with the careful movements of someone who understood trauma, who knew how to make a frightened child feel safe. Giuseppe was beside them now, fussing and apologizing, offering to call an ambulance for Maya's cuts. She waved him off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Giuseppe, really. Just get me the first aid kit from the back, would you?" But Luca was already standing, moving toward them with the fluid grace of a man who had learned to navigate hostile territory. He approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening, his eyes fixed on Maya's face rather than her injuries. "Miss," he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent that spoke of old country roots and new world power, "you're hurt." Maya looked up at him fully for the first time, taking in the expensive tailoring of his charcoal suit, the way it fit his broad shoulders with terrifying perfection, the unconscious authority in his posture. This was not a man who asked for things twice. "I'll be fine," she said, beginning to stand. "Your son is what matters. He wasn't hurt, just scared." "No," Luca said, and the single word carried enough weight to stop her movement. "You protected my boy. You bled for him. That matters to me more than you could possibly understand." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The other patrons had begun to return to their meals, the drunk had been escorted outside, and Giuseppe was hovering nearby with the first aid kit, clearly unsure whether he should approach this particular table. Maya found herself trapped in Luca's dark gaze, feeling as though he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade of normalcy. "It was nothing," she said finally, accepting the first aid kit from Giuseppe with a nod of thanks. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Luca replied, his voice soft but absolute. "They wouldn't, and we both know it." Maya began cleaning her wounds with practiced efficiency, her movements revealing a familiarity with emergency medical care that seemed at odds with her role as a waitress. Luca noticed everything, the way she assessed the depth of the cuts before treating them, the systematic approach to bandaging, the complete absence of trembling in her hands despite the adrenaline that should have been flooding her system. Carlo moved closer to Maya as she worked, his small presence a warm weight against her side. For a moment they formed an unlikely tableau, the bleeding waitress, the silent child, and the dangerous man watching them both with calculating intensity. "What's your last name?" Luca asked suddenly. Maya's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second before continuing their methodical work. "Chen?" "Maya Chen." He spoke her name like he was testing its weight on his tongue. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. She finished bandaging her left arm and moved to the right. "Mostly nights. I have other jobs during the day." "Other jobs?" It wasn't a question, but Maya answered anyway. "Cleaning office buildings. Data entry from home when I can get it. Whatever pays." Luca filed away this information along with everything else he had observed about Maya Chen in the past 15 minutes. The way she moved like someone with combat training. The way she had positioned herself to shield Carlo without exposing her own vital areas to the attacker. The way she spoke Italian with a precision that suggested formal study rather than casual pickup. The way her uniform, while clean and pressed, showed the wear patterns of someone who couldn't afford to replace it frequently. Most importantly, the way she had acted without hesitation to protect a child who wasn't hers from a man who could have destroyed her life with a single phone call. "I'd like to do something for you," Luca said finally, "to thank you." Maya looked up sharply, her brown eyes suddenly wary. "That's not necessary, really. It is to me." Luca reached into his jacket pocket, and Maya's entire body tensed for a moment before he withdrew a simple business card. No logo, just a name and phone number embossed in black ink on ivory cardstock. "If you ever need anything at all, Maya stared at the card for a long moment before taking it, her fingers careful not to touch his. The cardstock was heavy, expensive, the kind that cost more per sheet than she made in tips on a good night. "Thank you," she said quietly, tucking the card into her apron pocket. "But I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can." Luca's smile was barely visible, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "But sometimes we all need help, even the strongest of us." Carlo tugged on Maya's sleeve, drawing her attention back to him. When she looked down, he was holding up a crayon drawing he had been working on earlier, a stick-figure family standing outside a house with a large dog. He pointed to one of the figures, a woman with long dark hair wearing what could generously be interpreted as a waitress uniform. "That's you," he whispered in English, his voice still barely audible but gaining strength. "You saved me." Maya felt something crack inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She knelt down to Carlo's level, ignoring the pull of her bandaged cuts. "You saved yourself, brave boy," she said softly. "You listened when I told you to stay behind me. You were very smart and very brave." Carlo beamed at her, his smile transforming his serious little face into something radiant. When Maya glanced back up at Luca, she found him watching this interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read, something hungry and desperate and dangerous all at once. "We should go," Luca said finally, his voice rougher than it had been before. "It's late and you've had enough excitement for one night." He helped Carlo gather his crayons and drawing, then turned back to Maya one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for my son, for everything." As they walked toward the exit, Carlo broke free of his father's hand and ran back to Maya, wrapping his small arms around her waist in a fierce hug before darting back to Luca's side. Maya watched them leave through the rain-streaked windows, father and son disappearing into the night in a car that probably cost more than she would make in 5 years. She looked down at the business card in her hand, just a name, Luca Romano, and a phone number. No company, no title, no indication of what kind of help he might be offering. But something about the weight of the card, the quality of the printing, the way he had moved through the restaurant like he owned not just his space but everyone else's, told her this was not a man who made empty promises. Maya slipped the card back into her pocket and finished cleaning up the broken glass, her movements automatic and efficient. Giuseppe hovered nearby, clearly wanting to ask questions, but not quite daring to do so. The other patrons had returned to their meals and conversations, the drama already fading into the background noise of a typical Friday night in the city. But Maya could still feel the weight of Luca Romano's attention, even though he was long gone. She could still hear the whispered gratitude in Carlo's voice, still feel the fierce strength of his goodbye hug, and she could still see the way Luca had looked at her, not like a waitress who had done her job, but like something rare and valuable that he intended to acquire. The temperature in the restaurant returned to normal, but Maya Chen remained cold for the rest of her shift, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside and everything to do with the certainty that her carefully constructed invisible life was about to become very, very visible. She had no idea that by morning Luca Romano would know everything about her: her address, her mother's condition, her financial situation, her employment history, and most importantly, the military service record that explained exactly why she had moved like a soldier when violence erupted. Maya Chen had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, of blending into the background, of surviving through invisibility. But some predators hunted by scent rather than sight, and Luca Romano had caught her trail the moment she chose to bleed for his child. The rain continued to fall against Giuseppe's windows as Maya finished her shift, unaware that her life had already changed forever. In 12 hours she would lose her job. In 36 hours she would face eviction. In 72 hours she would receive an offer that would drag her out of the shadows and into the light of the most dangerous man in the city. But for now she was still invisible, still safe, still just a waitress with steady hands and hidden scars, wiping down tables and counting tips, and pretending that the business card in her pocket wasn't burning a hole through the cheap fabric of her uniform. The mask was still in place, but it wouldn't be for much longer. Maya's hands were shaking as she fumbled with her apartment key at 3:17 a.m. The adrenaline had finally worn off during the 40-minute subway ride home, leaving her hollow and exhausted. The cuts on her forearms throbbed with each heartbeat, the cheap bandages already showing spots of red where the bleeding hadn't fully stopped. Her studio apartment in Chinatown was a testament to careful poverty, clean but cramped, furnished with items salvaged from curbs and thrift stores. The Murphy bed dominated the single room, flanked by a kitchenette that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, and a bathroom she shared with the cockroaches. But it was hers, and more importantly, it was invisible. No doorman to remember faces, no security cameras in the hallways, no neighbours who asked questions. Maya stripped off her blood-stained uniform and examined her injuries under the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom. The cuts were clean but deep, requiring proper medical attention she couldn't afford. Instead, she cleaned them again with rubbing alcohol that made her bite her lip to keep from crying out, then applied fresh bandages with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. In the cracked mirror above the sink, her reflection showed the truth she worked so hard to hide. The exhaustion carved into her 24-year-old face, the careful way she held her shoulders to minimize her presence, the brown eyes that missed nothing but revealed less. Maya Chen, former staff sergeant, medically discharged after her father's heart attack had required her immediate return to civilian life to care for her mother. 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of service jobs and careful anonymity, and pretending she had never held an M4 carbine with the same steady hands that now carried dinner plates. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Maya glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Giuseppe's restaurant. "Maya, it's Giuseppe." His voice was strained, apologetic. "Listen, about tonight." She closed her eyes, already knowing what was coming. "It's okay, Giuseppe. I understand." "That man you stood up to? He made some calls, threatened to shut down my health inspection, get my liquor license reviewed. I can't... Maya, I'm sorry, I can't afford the trouble." "I know." Her voice was steady, professional. "When do you need my uniform back?" "Keep it. And Maya, what you did tonight, protecting that kid, that was right, but right doesn't pay the bills." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone screen, watching Giuseppe's name fade as the call ended. 3 years of steady work, gone. Her primary source of income eliminated because she had chosen to protect a child instead of protecting herself. She had $847 in her checking account. Rent was $1,200 due in 6 days. Her mother's care facility payment was $3,200 due in 10 days. The math was simple and devastating. Maya called in sick to her other 2 jobs, cleaning the Meridian building downtown at 6 a.m. and data entry for a medical billing company that paid by the keystroke. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to prevent the carefully constructed life she had built from crashing down around her. 23 blocks away, in a penthouse office overlooking the Hudson River, Luca Romano was having a very different kind of morning. "Tell me about Maya Chen." Tony Benedetto had been Luca's consigliere for 12 years, ever since they had served together in the Army Rangers before finding different paths in civilian life. Tony's research was always thorough, always accurate, and always delivered without judgment. This morning was no exception. Maya Susan Chen, age 24, born in San Francisco to Robert Chen and Li Wei Chen. Father deceased 3 years ago. Mother in assisted care for early-onset Alzheimer's. Tony consulted his tablet, his voice professional and precise. "Army medic, served 2 tours in Afghanistan with distinction. Staff sergeant at discharge, medical separation due to family hardship." Luca stood at his office windows, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. He had slept poorly, his mind replaying the image of a small woman bleeding to protect his son. Military training explains the reaction time. What else? Clean record, no arrests, no debts except medical bills for her mother's care. Currently employed at 3 locations, was employed at Giuseppe's until this morning, when she was terminated for causing a disturbance. Tony's tone suggested his opinion of this particular firing. She's invisible by choice, boss, overqualified for every job she's taken, deliberately staying under the radar. Why? Tony pulled up another screen. Best guess, PTSD from her service, complicated by civilian trauma. Her father died of a heart attack while she was deployed. She came home to find her mother already showing signs of cognitive decline and a mountain of medical debt. Classic case of someone who's been hit too hard too many times and decided to disappear. Luca turned from the window, his mind already calculating possibilities. Financial situation? Desperate, but not quite critical. She's been managing through multiple income streams, but losing Giuseppe's puts her in the red. Rent due Tuesday, mother's care facility payment due Friday. She's got maybe a week before the dominoes start falling. And her service record? Exemplary. Combat medic with advanced trauma training, small unit tactics, weapons proficiency with everything from pistols to crew-served weapons. Decorated twice for bravery under fire, including pulling 3 wounded soldiers out of a kill zone during a Taliban ambush. Tony closed his tablet and met Luca's eyes. Boss, this woman isn't just former military, she's former elite military, the kind of soldier they build legends around. Luca absorbed this information, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The way Maya had moved to shield Carlo, the professional assessment of her own injuries, the complete absence of panic or hesitation when faced with a violent drunk twice her size. She's been hiding, he murmured, more to himself than to Tony. For 3 years. Question is, hiding from what? Or who? Luca moved to his desk, picking up a silver-framed photograph of Carlo from his first day of school. His son's serious face stared back at him, the same solemn expression that had haunted their house since his mother's death. Carlo hadn't spoken to anyone except Luca in 6 months. The selective mutism had started after the car accident, the therapist calling it a trauma response that would resolve with time and patience. But last night, Carlo had spoken to Maya Chen, had thanked her in 2 languages and hugged her like she was family. I want full surveillance, discreet. I need to know her patterns, her vulnerabilities, her pressure points. Luca set down the photograph and met Tony's gaze. But I want to help her first, before she realizes she's being watched. What kind of help? The kind that creates obligation. Luca's smile was razor-thin. Start with her mother's care facility. There will be outstanding bills, insurance complications, bureaucratic obstacles. Make them disappear. Anonymously, for now. Tony nodded, already making notes on his tablet. And then? Then we wait. Maya Chen has been invisible for 3 years, but desperation has a way of making people visible. When she's ready to accept help, I want to be the one offering it. Meanwhile, Maya was discovering exactly how visible desperation could make a person. The Meridian Building's cleaning supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, met her in the lobby at 6 p.m. with an expression of professional regret. I'm sorry, Maya, but we've had to make some adjustments to staffing. Budget cuts, you understand? Maya understood perfectly. Word travelled fast in the network of low-wage jobs that formed the invisible backbone of the city. One firing led to another as employers shared information about problem employees who attracted the wrong kind of attention. The medical billing company was more direct. Your access has been revoked, the automated voice informed her when she tried to log into the system. Please contact Human Resources for more information. Human Resources didn't answer their phone. By evening, Maya had lost all 3 sources of income in a single day. She sat on her fire escape, watching the sun set over a city that suddenly felt hostile and foreign. The business card Luca Romano had given her was still in her uniform pocket, The expensive cardstock somehow warmed to the touch. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number for Sunset Gardens Care Facility. "Hi, this is Maya Chen. I'm calling about my mother's account." "Oh, Ms. Chen, I was just about to call you. There's been some wonderful news about your mother's account." Maya's heart stopped. What kind of news? "Well, it seems there was an error in her insurance processing. A supplemental policy that wasn't being applied properly. Everything's been corrected now, and there's actually a credit on the account. Your mother's care is covered for the next 6 months. The phone slipped from Maya's numb fingers, clattering onto the fire escape grating. 6 months. Her mother's care covered for 6 months, when yesterday she couldn't afford next week's payment. Insurance errors didn't correct themselves. Supplemental policies didn't appear out of nowhere. And Maya Chen didn't believe in coincidences, especially not the kind that happened less than 24 hours after meeting a man who moved through the world like he owned it. She retrieved her phone and stared at Luca Romano's business card for a long time, feeling the weight of invisible eyes watching her from the shadows. Somewhere in the city, someone was pulling strings on her behalf. Someone who wanted her to know that help was possible, that her invisible life could be made visible again, that her desperation had not gone unnoticed. Maya thought about Carlo's whispered thank you, about the way Luca had looked at her like she was something rare and valuable. She thought about her mother, safe and cared for because of some mysterious benefactor's intervention. She thought about her empty bank account and her unemployment, and the careful life she had built that was crumbling around her despite her best efforts to remain unseen. The temperature in the evening air seemed to drop 10 degrees as Maya finally admitted the truth to herself. She was being hunted, not by an enemy, but by someone who wanted to help her. Someone who had the power to solve her problems with a phone call and the patience to wait for her to realize she needed that help. Maya Chen had spent 3 years learning how to be invisible, but some predators hunted by scent rather than sight, and she was beginning to understand that she had been caught the moment she chose to bleed for Luca Romano's child. Her phone rang at 9:47 p.m. unknown number, local area code. "Miss Chen, this is Margaret Foster from Caring Hearts Employment Services. I understand you might be looking for work. I have a position that might interest you. Household management for a private client, excellent pay, immediate start. Would you be available to discuss it tomorrow morning?" Maya's hand tightened on the phone, her knuckles white against the black plastic. "What kind of household management?" "Childcare primarily. The client has an 8-year-old son who's had some difficulty adjusting after a family tragedy. They're looking for someone with your particular background and skill set." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could almost feel Luca Romano's dark eyes watching her from across the city, patient and predatory, and certain that she would make the choice he wanted her to make. "I'll need details," she said finally. "Of course. Shall we say 10 o'clock at Café Luna on Bleecker Street? I'll be wearing a red scarf." The line went dead before Maya could respond. She stared at her phone screen, watching the unknown number fade into her call history, and knew with absolute certainty that Caring Hearts Employment Services was about as real as her mother's mysterious insurance policy. But her rent was due in 5 days, and her savings wouldn't last a week. And somewhere in the city was a little boy who had spoken for the first time in months because she had been brave enough to stand between him and danger. Maya Chen had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility. Tomorrow morning she was going to learn what it meant to be seen by the most dangerous man in New York. The mask was already cracking. Soon it would shatter completely. And despite everything, the manipulation, the surveillance, the careful orchestration of her desperation, Maya found herself looking forward to it. Because being invisible was just another kind of death, and she had been dying by degrees for far too long. The rain began to fall as Maya retreated into her apartment, washing the city clean for whatever was coming next. She folded Luca Romano's business card carefully and placed it on her nightstand, where she could see it from her bed. Tomorrow she would step out of the shadows and into the light. Tomorrow she would discover what Luca Romano wanted from her, and what she was willing to give in return. But tonight, for the last time, Maya Chen was invisible, and somehow that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Maya arrived at Café Luna 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained by military training and sharpened by 3 years of service jobs where being late meant being fired. She chose a corner table with clear sightlines to all exits, her back to the wall, and ordered black coffee she couldn't afford while scanning the morning crowd for threats that probably weren't there. But probably wasn't the same as certainly, and Maya Chen had learned the difference in places where that distinction meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman in her 50s entered the cafe, her red scarf bright against the grey November morning. Margaret Foster looked exactly like what she claimed to be. A professional placement specialist with kind eyes and sensible shoes, and a leather portfolio that had seen better decades. She spotted Maya immediately, smiled with practiced warmth, and approached the table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to putting nervous job candidates at ease. "Miss Chen, I'm Margaret Foster. Thank you so much for meeting me on such short notice." Maya shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the absence of calluses that would suggest manual labour. "Ms. Foster, I have to admit I'm curious how you got my number. I didn't apply to any employment services." Margaret's smile never wavered as she settled into the opposite chair. "Word of mouth, my dear. Sometimes the best candidates are the ones who aren't actively looking. May I?" She gestured to Maya's coffee cup, already signalling the barista for her own order. "Of course." Maya leaned back slightly, maintaining eye contact while keeping her peripheral vision active. "You mentioned household management, childcare?" "Yes, for a very special little boy." Margaret opened her portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no company logo, just typed text on expensive stationery. "The family has been through some difficulties recently. The child's mother passed away 2 years ago in a car accident, and he's been struggling with selective mutism since then." Maya's heart rate increased by exactly 3 beats per minute. Not enough to be noticeable, but enough to confirm what she already knew. "What kind of care are they looking for?" "Someone with your particular background, military medical training, experience with trauma victims, fluency in Italian would be helpful, but not required." Margaret paused as the barista delivered her cappuccino, using the interruption to study Maya's face. "The father is protective. He's had difficulty finding someone he trusts with his son's well-being." "I can understand that." Maya kept her voice neutral, professional. "What happened to the previous caregiver?" "There wasn't one. The father has been handling everything himself, but his work requires more travel now, and the boy needs consistency, stability." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. "I'll be frank with you, Miss Chen. This family has resources, significant resources. The position pays $5,000 per week, plus full health benefits. Room and board if desired." Maya's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. $5,000 per week was more than she made in 3 months at all her previous jobs combined. It was enough to cover her mother's care, her own expenses, and actually start building a future instead of just surviving day to day. It was also impossible, unless the family in question operated outside the normal boundaries of legal employment. "That's very generous," Maya said carefully. "What aren't you telling me?" Margaret's smile became more genuine, less practiced. "You're direct. I like that. The truth is, the father's business involves certain security concerns. Nothing that would put you or the child in danger, but the household operates with privacy considerations that most people would find unusual. Background checks, confidentiality agreements, limited outside contact during work hours." Maya set down her coffee cup and studied the job description more carefully. The duties listed were standard: educational support, meal preparation, transportation to activities, overnight supervision when father travelled. But reading between the lines, she could see the shape of something larger and more dangerous. "Security concerns," she repeated. The father is a businessman with international interests. Sometimes that attracts unwanted attention from competitors." Margaret's tone remained pleasant, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. "I'm told you understand that kind of environment, that you've operated in situations where discretion and situational awareness were matters of life and death." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt the familiar chill that came with recognizing a predator, even one that wore a friendly face and offered assistance. Margaret Foster knew exactly who Maya was, exactly what she had done in Afghanistan, exactly how desperate her current situation had become. "I need to think about it," Maya said finally. "Of course, but I should mention that the position needs to be filled immediately. The father is travelling to Chicago tomorrow night, and he won't leave his son unless he knows the care arrangements are settled." Margaret reached into her portfolio again and withdrew a business card, different from Luca Romano's, but printed on the same expensive cardstock. "If you're interested, he'd like to meet you this afternoon. 2 o'clock at Central Park, near the Alice in Wonderland statue. He'll have the boy with him, so you can see how they interact." Maya studied the card. No company name, just Margaret Foster and a phone number with a local exchange. "And if I'm not interested, then you're not interested?" Margaret's smile was understanding, almost maternal. "But Miss Chen, opportunities like this don't come along very often, especially for people in your particular circumstances." The words were delivered gently, but they carried the weight of knowledge that no legitimate employment agent should possess. Margaret Foster knew about Maya's mother's condition. She knew about the job losses and the financial pressure and the medical bills that had been mysteriously resolved. She knew because someone had told her, someone who had been watching and waiting and orchestrating this entire conversation. Maya folded the job description and slipped it into her jacket pocket alongside Luca Romano's business card. "I'll be there." "Wonderful." Margaret closed her portfolio and stood, leaving a $20 bill on the table to cover both their drinks. "Miss Chen, the father is a good man who loves his son very much. Sometimes good men make difficult choices to protect the people they care about. I think you understand that better than most." After Margaret left, Maya sat alone in the cafe for another hour, watching the morning crowd of office workers and students and tourists flow past the windows like a river of normalcy she could no longer access. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from creditors, 3 voice messages from her landlord, and 1 text from the medical billing company confirming her contract termination. But her mother was safe for 6 months, and sitting in her pocket was an offer that would solve every financial problem she had ever faced. Maya walked the 30 blocks to Central Park instead of taking the subway, needing the time to think and the physical movement to settle her nerves. The November air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. She arrived at the Alice in Wonderland statue 20 minutes early and positioned herself on a nearby bench where she could observe the meeting point without being immediately visible. At exactly 2 o'clock, Luca Romano appeared with his son. They walked together from the direction of the Upper East Side, Luca's long stride automatically adjusted to match Carlo's shorter steps. The boy was dressed for the weather, in a navy peacoat and wool scarf, his dark hair neat but wind-blown. Luca wore the same kind of perfectly tailored charcoal suit he had worn to the restaurant, but today Maya could see the subtle modifications that marked it as more than just expensive clothing. The slightly looser fit through the shoulders that would accommodate a shoulder holster, the reinforced seams that wouldn't tear under stress, the fabric choice that would hide bloodstains. Carlo spotted Maya first, tugging on his father's sleeve and pointing in her direction with the excitement of a child recognizing a friend. Maya stood and walked toward them, noting the way Luca's eyes tracked her movement, cataloguing her approach angle and the way she kept her hands visible and non-threatening. "Miss Chen," Luca said when she was close enough for normal conversation. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Romano." Maya crouched down to Carlo's eye level, bringing herself into his personal space without looming over him. "Ciao, Carlo. Come stai?" "Bene, grazie," Carlo replied with a shy smile. "Your arms, do they hurt?" Maya glanced down at her bandaged forearms, visible beneath her rolled sleeves. "A little, but they're healing well. How are you feeling about Friday night?" "Scared," Carlo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you made it stop." "You made it stop too," Maya said gently. "When I told you to get behind me, you listened. You were very brave." Carlo beamed at her, then looked up at his father. "Papa, can Maya come home with us?" Luca's expression was unreadable, but something flickered behind his dark eyes. "That's what we're here to talk about. Figlio, why don't you show Maya your drawings while we discuss the details?" Carlo produced a sketchbook from his coat pocket and settled on the ground near the statue, immediately absorbed in his artwork. Maya and Luca moved a few steps away, close enough to supervise but far enough for private conversation. "He likes you," Luca observed. "He's a good kid, resilient." Maya kept her voice low, but didn't bother pretending she didn't know exactly what this meeting was about. Margaret Foster was very thorough in her presentation. "I'm sure she was." Luca's smile was slight but genuine. "What did you think of the offer?" "I think it's designed to be irresistible to someone in my position." Maya met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated by the weight of his attention. "I also think there are aspects of the job that weren't included in the written description." "Such as?" "The part where you've been having me watched since Friday night. The part where my mother's medical bills were mysteriously resolved by an anonymous benefactor. The part where I lost all 3 jobs in a single day through pressure you applied to make sure I'd be desperate enough to accept whatever you offered." Luca studied her for a long moment, and Maya had the distinct impression she was being evaluated by criteria she couldn't begin to guess. "You're angry. I'm realistic. You want something from me, and you've orchestrated a situation where refusing isn't really an option." Maya crossed her arms, ignoring the pull of her healing cuts. "The question is whether you're going to be honest about what that something is. I want you to take care of my son. And I want you to do it in a household where security is a constant concern, where confidentiality is non-negotiable, and where your military training might occasionally be relevant to keeping him safe." Luca glanced toward Carlo, who was showing his drawings to a passing family with enthusiastic commentary. "You've already proven you're willing to bleed for him. I'm asking if you're willing to live for him." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of honesty that cut through all the manipulation and orchestration. What happened to his mother? Car accident. Elena was driving home from her sister's house in Connecticut when a drunk driver ran a red light. Luca's voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Carlo was supposed to be with her, but he had a fever that morning, so I kept him home. He blames himself for not being there to protect her." "And the selective mutism?" "Started 3 days after the funeral. He hasn't spoken to anyone except me in 6 months, until Friday night when he thanked you." Luca turned to face Maya directly. "My son spoke to you, Miss Chen. He hasn't done that for anyone else since his mother died. That's worth more to me than you could possibly understand." Maya watched Carlo as he carefully shaded the details of what appeared to be a drawing of the 3 of them standing together near the statue. His concentration was absolute, his small hands steady and sure as he worked. There was something heartbreaking about the careful precision with which he drew their little group, as though he could make it real through sheer artistic will. "Your business," Maya said finally. "How dangerous is it?" "Dangerous enough that I employ a full security team, not dangerous enough that you or Carlo would ever be direct targets." Luca's tone was matter-of-fact, neither minimizing nor dramatizing the risks. "The people who might wish me harm understand that children are off-limits, but I won't lie to you. Being associated with my family means accepting a certain level of risk." "What kind of association are we talking about? Am I an employee or something more?" Luca was quiet for so long that Maya began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher, more intimate than it had been before. "I don't know yet, but I know that watching you protect my son was the first time in 2 years that I felt like my family might be whole again." He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, seen in ways she had forgotten were possible. "I'm not asking you to love us, Miss Chen. I'm asking you to let us take care of you while you take care of him." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, and more vulnerable than Maya had expected from a man who moved through the world like he owned it. She could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her, the safety of invisibility against the risk of being seen, the certainty of poverty against the uncertainty of power, the loneliness of independence against the complexity of belonging to something larger and more dangerous than herself. Carlo looked up from his drawing and called out in Italian, "Maya, look what I made!" He held up his sketchbook, showing a picture of the three of them standing in front of a large house with many windows. In the drawing, Maya was wearing a dress instead of her usual uniform, and Carlo was holding both her hand and his father's. At the bottom of the page, he had written in careful letters, "La mia familia," my family. Maya felt something crack inside her chest, the same warmth she had experienced at the restaurant, but stronger now, more insistent. She looked from the drawing to Carlo's hopeful face, to Luca's carefully controlled expression, and realized that the choice had already been made. Had been made the moment she stepped between a broken bottle and a frightened child, accepting pain to prevent greater pain. 5,000 a week, she asked, plus health insurance, room and board, and a signing bonus to cover any immediate expenses you might have. Confidentiality agreement? Standard non-disclosure about family business, household routines, security procedures, nothing that would prevent you from leaving if you chose to do so. Maya was quiet for a moment, watching Carlo carefully colour in the windows of his drawing house. "And if things don't work out? Then we part as friends, with generous severance and excellent references for any future position you might want." Luca paused, then added more quietly, "But I don't think it will come to that." Maya walked over to Carlo and knelt beside him, examining his drawing with the serious attention it deserved. "This is beautiful, Carlo. Is that where you live?" "See, with Papa and the big dog, and now maybe with you." His voice was hopeful, uncertain. "You could have your own room with books and a window that looks at the garden." Maya glanced back at Luca, who was watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something hungry and desperate and careful all at once, like a man who had been alone for a very long time and was afraid to hope for anything different. "I'd like that very much," Maya said finally, "but I need to visit my mother first to let her know where I'll be." Carlo's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? You'll come live with us, really?" "Really?" Maya ruffled his hair gently, the gesture feeling natural and right in a way that surprised her. "But I have some conditions we need to discuss." She stood and walked back to Luca, noting the way his shoulders relaxed slightly now that her answer was clear. "I want transparency about any situation that might put Carlo in danger. I want the right to make emergency medical decisions if you're not available, and I want to maintain contact with my mother's care facility." "Done." Luca's response was immediate, decisive. "Anything else?" "Yes." Maya met his gaze and held it, letting him see the steel beneath her careful composure. "I need you to understand that I'm not doing this because I was backed into a corner. I'm doing this because that little boy deserves to feel safe and loved, and because I think I can help him heal. But if you ever use my mother's well-being or my financial situation as leverage against me, I will disappear so completely that you'll never find me again. Are we clear?" Luca's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Crystal clear, Miss Chen. Welcome to the family." As they walked out of Central Park together, Luca and Maya flanking Carlo, who chattered excitedly about showing Maya his room and his books and his collection of model cars, Maya felt the last of her invisible armour falling away. For 3 years she had perfected the art of being overlooked, of surviving through anonymity and careful distance from anything that might hurt her. But some risks were worth taking. Some families were worth fighting for. And some little boys deserved to have someone love them enough to step out of the shadows and into the dangerous light of belonging. Maya Chen was about to discover what it meant to be visible again, and despite everything, the manipulation, the orchestration, the careful web of obligation that had been spun around her, she found herself looking forward to it. The mask was gone, the waitress was disappearing, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone capable of protecting what mattered most, someone who had chosen to be seen. The Romano estate sprawled across 5 acres in Westchester County, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates that looked decorative, until Maya noticed the discreet cameras and motion sensors embedded in the landscaping. The house itself was a study in understated luxury, federal-style brick and limestone that had aged gracefully over 2 centuries, with tall windows that gleamed like watching eyes in the afternoon sunlight. "Welcome home," Luca said as his driver navigated the circular driveway, and Maya felt something twist in her chest at the casual way he included her in that word. Home. She hadn't had one of those in 3 years, not really. Just places to sleep between shifts, temporary shelters that could be abandoned at a moment's notice. Carlo pressed his face to the window, pointing out landmarks with the enthusiasm of a tour guide. "That's where the rabbits live, and that's the tree I climb sometimes, and over there is where Rocco likes to sleep in the sun." "Rocco?" Maya asked. "Our dog," Luca explained. "A mastiff. Carlo named him after his grandfather." As if summoned by his name, an enormous brindle mastiff appeared around the corner of the house, moving with the deceptive grace of a creature bred for both protection and companionship. Carlo was out of the car before it had fully stopped, running toward the dog with his arms outstretched. Rocco's tail wagged as he submitted to Carlo's enthusiastic embrace, but Maya noted the way the animal's eyes tracked her movement as she emerged from the vehicle. "He's beautiful," Maya said, extending her hand for Rocco to investigate. The dog approached cautiously, his massive head lowering to sniff her fingers before allowing her to scratch behind his ears. "How long have you had him?" "Since Carlo was 4, Elena insisted we needed a family dog." Luca's voice was carefully neutral when he mentioned his late wife, but Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Rocco appointed himself Carlo's personal guardian. He hasn't left the boy's side since the accident." Maya watched Carlo whisper something in Italian to the dog, who responded with a gentle woof and a tail wag that could have knocked down a smaller child. There was something deeply comforting about the bond between them, the way Carlo's entire posture relaxed in the animal's presence. "Come on," Luca said, gesturing toward the front entrance. "Let me show you around." The interior of the house was a masterpiece of renovation that honoured the building's historic bones while incorporating modern necessities. Wide plank hardwood floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the rooms with natural light. But Maya's trained eye caught the details that transformed this from merely an elegant home into a fortress. The reinforced door frames, the discreet panic room entrance hidden behind a bookshelf, the security monitors cleverly disguised as decorative mirrors. "The guest wing is on the 2nd floor," Luca explained, as they climbed a mahogany staircase that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary had been. 3 bedrooms, private bathroom, sitting area. You can redecorate however you'd like. Maya's suite was larger than her entire former apartment, with windows that overlooked the garden and furniture that belonged in a museum. But what struck her most was the attention to detail. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, books in multiple languages on the shelves, a writing desk positioned to catch the afternoon light. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." "It's temporary," Luca replied, his tone carefully neutral, "until you decide where you'd prefer to be permanently." Maya turned to study his face, noting the way he avoided her gaze while saying those words. There was something vulnerable in his posture, a carefully controlled hope that suggested her permanent residence was a subject he'd given considerable thought to. "Where is Carlo's room?" Down the hall, he specifically requested that you be close enough to hear if he has nightmares. Luca's expression softened. They've been more frequent lately. The change in routine, I think. Carlo appeared in the doorway as if summoned by their conversation, Rocco's massive form filling the space behind him. Maya, want to see my room? I have all the Harry Potter books in Italian and English, and a telescope for looking at stars, and models of every Ferrari ever made. Maya followed Carlo down the hall, taking note of the family photographs that lined the walls. Elena Romano had been a beautiful woman. Dark hair, warm eyes, the kind of smile that transformed her entire face. In every picture, she was touching someone. Her hand on Luca's shoulder, her arms around Carlo, her fingers intertwined with both of them in family portraits that spoke of genuine affection rather than posed obligation. Carlo's room was a study in organised chaos, bookshelves crammed with volumes in multiple languages, model cars arranged in careful displays, art supplies scattered across a desk positioned near the window. A telescope stood in one corner, pointed toward the sky, and the walls were covered with Carlo's own artwork, interspersed with photographs of his parents. "This is where I draw you," Carlo said, pointing to the desk. "Want to see?" He pulled out a sketchbook and flipped through pages filled with detailed drawings. Maya was startled to see how accurately he had captured her features, her posture, even the expression she wore when concentrating. There were drawings of her from the restaurant, from the park, and several that appeared to be imagined scenes of domestic life. Maya reading him stories, helping with homework, playing in the garden with Rocco. "These are incredible, Carlo. You're really talented." Maya sat on his bed, studying each drawing with genuine admiration. "How long have you been drawing?" "Mama taught me when I was little. She said pictures can say things that words can't." Carlo climbed onto the bed beside her, his shoulder warm against her arm. "When I couldn't talk after she died, I drew everything instead." Maya felt her throat tighten at the simple honesty in his voice. "That's a very smart way to handle difficult feelings. Papa says you know about helping people when they're hurt, not just their bodies, but the hurt inside too. I've had some training, yes, but mostly I've learned that sometimes the best help is just showing up and staying." Maya turned to meet Carlo's serious gaze. "Is that something you'd like? Someone who shows up and stays?" Carlo nodded so emphatically that his dark hair fell across his forehead. "I dream about Mama sometimes. And she's sad because Papa and I are sad all the time. But when you were at the restaurant, I wasn't sad. I felt protected." Maya's chest ached with the weight of this 8-year-old's wisdom and grief. She reached out and gently brushed the hair from his eyes, the gesture feeling natural and right. "Then let's work on not being sad all the time," she said softly. "What do you say?" Carlo's response was to throw his arms around her in a fierce hug that spoke of 2 years of accumulated longing for maternal comfort. Maya held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a little boy who needed her, who had already carved out a space for her in his broken heart, and was hoping she would choose to fill it. "How about we start with dinner?" Maya suggested when Carlo finally loosened his hold. "Do you like to cook?" "Sometimes. Papa makes pasta, but he burns everything else." Carlo giggled, the sound bright and infectious. "Rosa usually cooks, but she only comes during the day." "Rosa?" "Our housekeeper. She's nice, but she thinks I'm too fragile for kitchen knives." Carlo's expression turned mischievous. "Are you going to think I'm too fragile for kitchen knives?" Maya pretended to consider this seriously. "Well, that depends. Do you know the difference between a chef's knife and a paring knife?" "Of course, and I know you always cut away from your body and keep your fingers curled like claws when you're holding what you're cutting." "Then you're definitely not too fragile for kitchen knives. Come on, let's go see what we can make for dinner." They found Luca in his office, a wood-panelled room lined with legal texts and financial journals that looked impressively legitimate. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian that Maya's military language training allowed her to follow. Something about shipping delays and customs inspections and the need for alternative arrangements. His tone was calm, authoritative, but there was an undercurrent of steel that suggested consequences for whoever had created these problems. Carlo knocked on the doorframe, and Luca immediately shifted his attention, holding up one finger to indicate he needed another moment. "Risolvi questo oggi," he said into the phone, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Fix this today. E la prossima volta che qualcuno tocca le nostre spedizioni, voglio sapere chi ha dato l'ordine. And the next time someone touches our shipments, I want to know who gave the order." He hung up and turned to them with a smile that transformed his entire demeanour from dangerous businessman to devoted father. "How are you settling in?" "Maya's going to teach me to use kitchen knives properly," Carlo announced proudly. "We're making dinner." Luca's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked from his son to Maya. "Is that wise? He's still quite young." "He's 8, not 4, Maya replied, noting the way Carlo straightened his shoulders at her defence of his maturity. "And proper knife skills are safer than improper ones. Besides, cooking together is good therapy for trauma recovery. It builds confidence and creates positive associations with nurturing activities." The clinical explanation seemed to reassure Luca, but Maya caught something else in his expression, surprise perhaps at hearing his son defended so matter-of-factly. How long had it been since someone had advocated for Carlo's capabilities instead of his limitations? "In that case, I'd like to help," Luca said, standing and straightening his tie. "If you don't mind the company." Maya was about to respond when her attention was caught by a flicker of movement outside the office window. A man in a dark jacket was walking the perimeter of the property, speaking into what appeared to be a radio or cell phone. As she watched, he was joined by another figure emerging from the tree line. "Security patrol," Luca explained, following her gaze. "They do rounds every 2 hours during the day, every hour after sunset." "How many men do you employ?" 8 on rotation, plus Tony, who coordinates overall security." Luca moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her former monthly rent. "Does that make you nervous?" Maya considered the question seriously. "It makes me curious about what you think you need protection from." "I think the better question is what I'm trying to protect," Luca replied quietly, his gaze moving from the security patrol to Carlo, who was examining the books on his father's shelves. "Everything I care about is in this house." The weight of that statement settled between them, heavy with implication. Maya understood that she was being included in that everything, that her presence here was shifting the dynamics of protection and vulnerability in ways that extended far beyond her role as Carlo's caregiver. "Papa, can we cook now?" Carlo interrupted, apparently having grown bored with examining legal texts. "I want to show Maya how you make the pasta sauce that doesn't come from a jar." "My grandmother's recipe," Luca explained to Maya as they moved toward the kitchen. "The only thing I can make without burning down the house." The kitchen was a chef's dream, professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and enough space for multiple cooks to work without getting in each other's way. Maya immediately began assessing the available ingredients, her mind automatically planning a menu that would be both nutritious and appealing to an 8-year-old palate. "How about chicken piccata with fresh pasta?" she suggested. "Carlo can help with the pasta dough, and we can all work on the sauce together." What followed was perhaps the most domestic hour of Maya's adult life. She watched Luca shed his intimidating businessman persona as he taught Carlo the proper technique for kneading pasta dough, his large hands guiding his son's smaller ones with infinite patience. Carlo chattered throughout the process, asking questions about cooking techniques and telling stories about the meals his mother used to make, his grief present but no longer overwhelming. Maya found herself falling into the rhythm of family dinner preparation, seasoning the chicken while monitoring the pasta water and keeping up a running conversation with both Romano men. There was something deeply satisfying about the collaborative effort, the way they moved around each other in the kitchen with increasing familiarity. "Maya, watch this," Carlo called out, proudly displaying his first successfully rolled piece of pasta. "Is it thin enough?" "Perfect," Maya confirmed, genuinely impressed. "Your nonna would be proud." "She always said cooking was about love, not just following recipes," Luca added, his voice carrying a warmth that Maya was beginning to recognize as his true nature beneath the controlled exterior. That you could taste the difference when someone cooked with care. Maya glanced up from the stove to find Luca watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something in his expression that went beyond gratitude for her care of Carlo, something that spoke of a man who had been alone for a very long time and was beginning to remember what it felt like to want something for himself. "The sauce is ready," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Carlo, want to taste test?" Dinner was served in the formal dining room, though the atmosphere was anything but formal. Carlo had insisted on using the good china because Maya's first dinner should be special, and he had even picked flowers from the garden to create a centerpiece that was more enthusiastic than artistic, but undeniably charming. As they ate, Maya watched the interaction between father and son with her trained eye for family dynamics. Luca was clearly devoted to Carlo, but there was a careful quality to his attention, as though he was constantly monitoring his son for signs of distress or withdrawal. Carlo, for his part, seemed to bloom under his father's focused attention, but Maya could see the weight of being the sole recipient of such intense parental concern. "This is really good, Maya," Carlo said between bites. "Will you teach me to make other things too?" "If your father doesn't mind me taking over his kitchen occasionally," Maya replied, glancing at Luca for permission. "The kitchen is yours whenever you want it," Luca said immediately. "This is the most I've seen Carlo eat at dinner in months." Maya felt a warm glow of satisfaction at the simple domestic success. Cooking together builds appetite along with confidence. Plus, it's a life skill he'll need eventually. "Eventually," Luca repeated, his tone thoughtful. "You're thinking long-term." "I try to think practically about child development," Maya replied carefully, aware that they were discussing more than just cooking lessons. Kids need consistency and forward momentum, not just crisis management. Something shifted in Luca's expression, a recognition of competence that went beyond what he had expected. "You've thought about this, about Carlo's needs, his development." "It's what I'm here for." "Is it?" Luca's question was quiet, meant only for her ears while Carlo concentrated on his pasta. "Because I'm beginning to think it might be more complicated than that." Maya met his gaze across the table, feeling the weight of possibility and danger in equal measure. Everything worthwhile is complicated. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming sound that made Luca's entire posture change. He glanced at his phone, his expression darkening as he read whatever message had appeared. "I need to take this," he said, standing. "Maya, would you mind?" "Of course. Take your time." Maya watched Luca disappear into his office, noting the way his shoulders tensed as he prepared to deal with whatever crisis had presented itself. This was the reality of his world: constant vigilance, constant pressure, constant reminders that the peaceful family dinner they had just shared existed within a framework of danger and complexity that never fully disappeared. "Papa has to work a lot," Carlo said quietly, apparently having noticed the same shift in his father's demeanour, "especially at night. Does that worry you?" Carlo considered the question with the seriousness of a child who had learned early that the world could be unpredictable and dangerous. "Sometimes, but he always comes home, and Tony says the house is the safest place in the whole state." Maya filed away this information along with everything else she was learning about the Romano family dynamics. Carlo had clearly been shielded from the worst details of his father's business, but he was old enough to understand that safety was something that had to be actively maintained rather than simply assumed. "Well, if Tony says it, it must be true," Maya said lightly. "How about we clean up the kitchen and then you can show me how to use that telescope of yours?" As they worked together to clear the table and load the dishwasher, Maya found herself thinking about the ease with which she had fallen into this domestic rhythm. 3 days ago, she had been invisible, surviving paycheck to paycheck in a world that barely acknowledged her existence. Tonight, she was planning breakfast menus and bedtime routines for a little boy who looked at her like she might be the answer to prayers he had been afraid to voice. Luca returned from his office 20 minutes later, his expression grim but controlled. "I'm sorry about that. Business doesn't always respect dinner hour." "Everything okay?" Maya asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Nothing that can't be handled." Luca's smile was reassuring, but didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did I miss anything interesting?" "Maya's going to help me look at Saturn tonight," Carlo announced, "and tomorrow she's going to teach me to make pancakes that look like cars." "Ambitious plans," Luca said, his expression warming as he focused on his son. "But first homework. I believe you have a history report due tomorrow." Carlo's face fell dramatically. "Do I have to? It's Maya's first night and homework is boring." "Homework first, then telescope time," Maya said firmly but kindly. "That's the deal. Besides, I'm curious about this history report. What's your topic?" "The Roman Empire," Carlo said with a sigh. "I have to write about Julius Caesar." "Perfect. I know quite a bit about military history. Why don't we work on it together?" The next hour was spent at the kitchen table, with Maya helping Carlo organise his research, while Luca reviewed what appeared to be financial documents. There was something deeply satisfying about the quiet domesticity of the scene. Homework supervision, while dinner dishes dried in the rack, classical music playing softly from hidden speakers, Rocco stretched out on his bed in the corner, watching over his family. Maya found herself studying Luca's profile as he worked, noting the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he concentrated, the precise movements of his hands as he made notes in margins. This was not the dangerous man who had orchestrated her recruitment or the commanding figure who inspired fear in his subordinates. This was simply a father sharing evening quiet with his child, a man who had learned to find peace in small domestic moments. "Maya," Carlo's voice interrupted her observations, "do you think Julius Caesar was brave or just lucky?" Maya considered the question seriously. "What do you think? Can someone be both?" "I think maybe he was brave until he got lucky, and then he forgot that luck doesn't last forever," Carlo said thoughtfully. "That's why they killed him, right? Because he thought he was too important to be hurt?" Maya glanced at Luca, who had looked up from his papers to listen to his son's analysis. There was something pointed about Carlo's conclusion, as though the 8-year-old understood more about the relationship between power and vulnerability than he should have at his age. "That's very insightful," Maya said carefully. "Sometimes the most dangerous thing about power is believing you're invincible because of it." Luca's eyes met hers across the table, and she saw recognition there, an acknowledgement that they were discussing more than just ancient Roman history. In this house, the line between historical lessons and contemporary reality was perhaps thinner than in most families. "Homework finished," Carlo announced, closing his notebook with satisfaction. "Now telescope time?" The three of them climbed to the 3rd floor, where a small observatory had been built into what had probably once been an attic. The telescope was a serious piece of equipment, clearly chosen by someone who understood both astronomy and the importance of nurturing a child's curiosity about the world beyond his immediate experience. Maya watched Carlo's face light up as he located Saturn's rings in the eyepiece, his excitement infectious even though the wonder of the night sky was something she had learned to appreciate during long watches in Afghanistan. But seeing it through his eyes, sharing his discovery of beauty in the darkness, felt like remembering something essential about hope and possibility that she had forgotten during her years of survival. "Look, Maya, you can see the rings." Carlo stepped back to give her access to the telescope. "Isn't it beautiful?" Maya adjusted the focus and found herself genuinely moved by the sight of Saturn hanging in the darkness like a jewel suspended in black velvet. "It's incredible, Carlo. Thank you for sharing this with me." When she looked up, she found Luca watching them both with an expression that made her chest tighten. There was something raw and hungry in his gaze, as though he was memorizing this moment of his son's joy and her participation in it. "What?" Maya asked quietly. "He hasn't shown anyone his telescope since Elena died," Luca said, his voice rough with emotion. "She was the one who helped him set it up, who taught him about the constellations. I didn't think he'd want to share it with anyone else." Maya understood the significance of what she was witnessing. Carlo wasn't just showing her his telescope. He was sharing something sacred, something that connected him to his mother's memory. The trust implicit in that sharing was both humbling and terrifying. "I'm honoured," she said simply, and meant it. They stayed on the roof for another hour, taking turns at the telescope, while Carlo narrated the mythology behind various constellations. Maya found herself relaxing into the easy family rhythm, her constant vigilance softening in the peaceful darkness. For the first time in 3 years, she felt safe enough to let her guard down, to exist in the moment without calculating exit strategies or threat assessments. But safety, Maya was beginning to understand, was not the same as security, because with every passing hour in this house, with every smile from Carlo and every warm glance from Luca, she was becoming more invested in something she could lose, more visible to forces that might want to use her connection to the Romano family against them. As they finally made their way back downstairs, Carlo yawning despite his protest that he wasn't tired, Maya caught sight of a figure moving through the garden outside. Just a shadow against shadows, but enough to remind her that this peaceful evening existed within a framework of constant protection against threats she didn't yet understand. "Bedtime, Piccolo," Luca said gently, ruffling his son's hair. "You have school tomorrow." "Will Maya still be here when I get home?" Carlo asked, sudden worry creeping into his voice. "I'll be here," Maya promised, crouching down to his eye level. "And tomorrow after school we'll work on those car-shaped pancakes." Carlo's goodnight hug was fierce and trusting, the embrace of a child who had decided to risk loving someone new. As Maya watched Luca tuck his son into bed, conducting their bedtime ritual of checking the locks and ensuring Rocco was properly positioned for overnight protection, she realized that she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just an employee in the Romano household. She was family, with all the joy and terror that word implied. And in the shadows beyond the windows, unseen watchers continued their patient vigil, protecting what had become precious to a man who had learned the hard way that everything he loved could be taken from him in an instant. Maya Chen was visible now, fully and completely. The question was whether that visibility would be her salvation or her downfall. 3 weeks into her new life, Maya woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the Westchester hills like distant artillery. The storm had been building all evening, and now, at 2:17 a.m., it was unleashing its fury against the estate with the kind of violence that made the old house creak and settle in ways that might have been alarming if she hadn't already learned to distinguish between the sounds of weather and the sounds of threat. But it wasn't the thunder that had woken her. It was the soft knock on her bedroom door, followed by a whispered voice that made her heart clench. "Maya, I'm scared." She found Carlo standing in the hallway in his Batman pajamas, Rocco pressed against his side like a furry shield. The boy's dark hair was tousled from sleep, and his eyes were wide with the particular fear that comes from being 8 years old in a big house during a storm. "Hey, sweetheart," Maya said softly, immediately dropping to his eye level. "What's wrong?" "The thunder sounds like car crashes," Carlo whispered, his small hands twisted in Rocco's fur. "And I keep thinking about Mama, and I can't make it stop." Maya's chest ached at the simple honesty of his admission. 3 weeks of careful progress, 3 weeks of watching Carlo slowly emerge from his shell, and a thunderstorm had brought it all crashing back. But that was how trauma worked. Not a straight line of healing, but a series of advances and retreats, small victories and unexpected setbacks. Would it help if we talked about her? Maya asked gently. Sometimes when we're missing someone, the best thing to do is remember the good parts. Carlo nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Will you sit with me? Of course. Come on, let's go to the kitchen. I'll make us some hot chocolate, and you can tell me about your mama. They made their way downstairs carefully, Rocco leading the way with the confidence of a dog who knew every creaky floorboard in the house. The kitchen was dark, except for the security lights that cast long shadows across the marble countertops, but Maya had learned the layout well enough to navigate without disturbing anyone else. As she heated milk on the stove and Carlo settled at the breakfast bar, the boy began to speak in the halting way of someone trying to put enormous feelings into small words. Mama used to make hot chocolate when I had nightmares, he said quietly, but she put cinnamon in it, and she would sing to me in Italian while we drank it. What did she sing? Stella Stellina, like a lullaby. It's about a little star that gets lost but finds its way home. Carlo's voice was barely above a whisper. She said I was her little star, and no matter how dark it got, she would always help me find my way home. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she added cinnamon to the warming milk, understanding now why Carlo's grief was so complicated. He hadn't just lost his mother, he had lost his guiding light, his sense of safety in the world. That sounds like a beautiful song, Maya said, keeping her voice steady. Do you remember the words? Carlo nodded and began to sing softly in Italian, his young voice clear and sweet despite the tears that had started to fall. The melody was simple but haunting, the kind of lullaby that mothers had been singing to frightened children for centuries. Maya was so focused on Carlo that she didn't notice they had acquired an audience until a familiar voice joined in with the second verse, deeper and rougher but carrying the same melody with heartbreaking accuracy. Luca stood in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair messed from sleep, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants that made him look younger and more vulnerable than his usual tailored armour. But it was the expression on his face as he sang his late wife's lullaby to their grieving son that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Carlo looked up at his father with surprise and something that might have been relief. "Papa, you remember Mama's song?" "I remember everything about your Mama," Luca said softly, moving into the kitchen with the careful movements of someone trying not to disturb a fragile moment, including the way she made hot chocolate that was more sugar than milk. Maya put cinnamon in it like Mama did, Carlo said, his voice strengthening with his father's presence. And she's going to sit with me until the thunder stops. Luca met Maya's eyes over his son's head, and she saw gratitude there, and something deeper. Something that recognized the significance of her being the one Carlo had turned to in his moment of fear, the one he trusted to help him navigate the dark waters of his grief. "Would you mind if I joined you?" Luca asked quietly. "It's been a long time since I heard that song." What followed was perhaps the most intimate hour Maya had spent since arriving at the estate. The three of them sat around the kitchen island, sharing hot chocolate and memories of Elena Romano while the storm raged outside. Carlo talked about his mother with the mixture of joy and sadness that comes from missing someone desperately while still treasuring their memory. Maya learned that Elena had been a paediatric nurse who had met Luca when he was visiting a friend's child in the hospital. She learned that Elena had insisted on a small wedding because she wanted to spend the money on their honeymoon in Italy instead. She learned that Elena had taught Carlo to draw because she believed art was a way to express feelings that were too big for words. But mostly, Maya learned that the Romano family's grief was not just about loss. It was about the fear that loving someone new meant betraying the memory of someone who had been irreplaceable. "Mama would have liked you," Carlo said suddenly, studying Maya's face with the serious concentration he usually reserved for his drawings. "She always said the best people are the ones who help others, even when it's hard." Maya felt something crack inside her chest at the simple generosity of the statement. "Thank you, Carlo. That means everything to me." "She's right," Luca added quietly, his dark eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her feel seen in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. Elena had good judgment about people. If she said she would have liked you, you can trust that. The thunder was beginning to fade, the worst of the storm moving east toward the city. But none of them seemed eager to break the spell of this quiet intimacy. Maya found herself studying the interplay between father and son, noting the way Luca's entire posture changed when he talked about his late wife. Not defensive or closed off, but careful, as though he was handling something precious and fragile. "Papa," Carlo said suddenly, his voice small and uncertain. "Is it okay if I love Maya too? I don't want to forget Mama, but I don't want to be sad all the time either." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya watched Luca struggle with emotions too complex for easy answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. "Carlo, loving someone new doesn't mean you love your mama any less. Your heart isn't like a cup that gets empty when you pour some out. It's like a garden that grows bigger every time you plant something new." Luca reached across the counter to touch his son's hand. "Mama would want you to be happy. She would want you to love and be loved by people who take good care of you." Carlo absorbed this with the seriousness of a child trying to understand adult concepts that would challenge people twice his age. "So I can love Maya and still love Mama?" "Yes, Figlio, you can love them both." Carlo turned to Maya with eyes that were bright with unshed tears and something that looked like hope. "Maya, will you be my family too? Not instead of Mama, but as well as—" Maya felt the full weight of the moment, understanding that her answer would shape not just Carlo's healing, but the entire dynamic of their unconventional family. She looked from Carlo's expectant face to Luca's carefully controlled expression, seeing the vulnerability both males were trying to hide. "I would be honoured to be your family, Carlo," she said softly, "as well as, not instead of." Carlo's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. But it was Luca's reaction that made Maya's pulse quicken, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his dark eyes softened, the way he looked at her as though she had just given him something he had been afraid to hope for. The spell was broken by the soft chiming of Luca's phone, a sound that had become familiar over the past 3 weeks. Work never fully stopped in his world, even at 3 in the morning during family conversations that were reshaping the foundations of their lives. Luca glanced at the message, and Maya saw his expression shift from tender to alert in the space of a heartbeat. "I need to take this," he said, his voice carrying the controlled tension she was learning to recognize as his business persona reasserting itself. "Is everything okay?" Maya asked, noting the way his jaw had tightened. "Nothing that can't be handled," Luca replied, but the automatic response didn't quite mask the concern in his eyes. "Carlo, can you finish your hot chocolate and then let Maya tuck you back in? Papa needs to make some phone calls." Carlo nodded, apparently accustomed to his father's nocturnal business requirements, but Maya caught the flicker of anxiety that crossed his features. After 3 weeks in this house, she was beginning to understand that Luca's late-night calls were never about routine matters. As Luca disappeared into his office, Maya helped Carlo rinse their mugs and make their way back upstairs. But as they reached the 2nd floor, Carlo stopped and turned to her with the kind of directness that only children possess. "Maya, when Papa has to work at night, does that mean someone is trying to hurt us?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it revealed how much Carlo understood about the reality of their lives. An 8-year-old should not have to worry about whether his father's business calls meant danger was approaching. "What makes you think that?" Maya asked carefully, crouching down to his eye level. "Because he gets the same look he had the night Mama died, like he's scared but trying not to show it." Carlo's voice was matter of fact, the tone of a child who had learned early to read the adults around him for signs of trouble. "And Tony comes over more when Papa has lots of night meetings." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Carlo was right. Over the past week, she had noticed an increase in security meetings, more frequent patrols, a subtle tightening of protocols around the estate. She had assumed it was routine, but clearly there was nothing routine about it. "Sometimes your papa's work involves people who don't play by the same rules we do," Maya said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "But that's why we have Tony and the security team, and that's why your papa is so careful about keeping you safe." "And you? Will you keep me safe too?" Maya met Carlo's serious dark eyes and made a promise that she understood might cost her everything. "Yes, Carlo, I will keep you safe, no matter what." Carlo nodded as though her promise had settled something important in his mind. "Good, because I think the people who want to hurt Papa don't know that you used to be a soldier. They think you're just nice Maya who makes pancakes, but I know you're strong Maya who isn't afraid of anything." The child's perception was startling in its accuracy. Maya realized that Carlo had been watching her just as carefully as she had been watching him, cataloguing the details that didn't quite fit with her role as a simple caregiver, the way she checked the locks before bed, the way she positioned herself between him and strangers, the way she moved through the house with the situational awareness of someone trained to identify and neutralize threats. "You're very observant," Maya said softly. "That's a good quality to have." "Mama said the same thing. She said watching and understanding people would keep me safe." Carlo hugged her good night, his small arms fierce and trusting around her waist. "I'm glad you're here, Maya. I feel safer when you're here." After tucking Carlo back into bed and ensuring Rocco was properly positioned for overnight protection, Maya found herself unable to return to sleep. Instead, she stood at her bedroom window, watching the security patrol make their rounds in the aftermath of the storm. The men moved with professional efficiency, but there was something different about their posture tonight, more alert, more focused, as though they were expecting trouble rather than simply preventing it. A soft knock on her door interrupted her surveillance. Luca stood in the hallway, still wearing his casual clothes but carrying the tension that accompanied his most serious business concerns. "I saw your light," he said quietly. "Can't sleep." "Carlo's question got me thinking," Maya replied, stepping aside to let him enter her room. It was the first time he had been in her private space, and she was suddenly aware of how intimate the setting was. Her rumpled bed, her personal belongings, the faint scent of her shampoo in the air. "About what?" "About whether there's something I should know. About increased threats, security concerns, anything that might affect Carlo's safety." Luca was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could practically see him weighing the benefits of transparency against his instinct to protect her from the darker aspects of his world. "There's been some territorial pressure lately," he said finally. "Nothing immediate, nothing that directly threatens the family. But my business associates have been receiving messages that suggest someone is testing our defences." "What kind of messages?" "The kind that are designed to make us nervous without being specific enough to constitute an actual threat." Luca moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Shipments delayed by mysterious customs problems, key personnel receiving job offers from competitors, small acts of sabotage that could be explained as coincidence if taken individually." Maya absorbed this information, her military training immediately beginning to assess patterns and implications. "How long has this been going on?" 3 weeks. The significance of the timing was not lost on either of them. "Since I arrived." "The timing could be coincidental," Luca said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than she did. "Or it could be someone testing whether your presence represents a change in our defensive capabilities." Maya turned to face him directly, noting the way the moonlight cast shadows across his features and made his dark eyes appear almost black. "Are you telling me this because you want me to leave?" "I'm telling you this because you asked, and because you have a right to know what you might be walking into." Luca's voice was rough, edged with something that sounded like fear. "The last thing I want is for you to leave, but I need you to understand that staying means accepting risks that go beyond normal household employment." Maya studied his face in the dim light, seeing the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior. This was not the commanding figure who inspired fear in his subordinates, or the smooth businessman who navigated complex negotiations. This was simply a man who had already lost one woman he cared about and was terrified of losing another. "Luca," she said softly, using his first name deliberately. "I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've been shot at by people who actually wanted me dead. A few business competitors trying to send messages. Doesn't exactly qualify as my most dangerous assignment." Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude, that she wasn't running from the complexity of their situation. "This is different," he said quietly. "In Afghanistan you were a soldier with military support and clear rules of engagement. Here you're—" "What? What am I here, Luca?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Maya could see the moment when Luca made the decision to be honest, the way his careful composure cracked to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. "You're the woman my son loves like a mother. You're the person who makes this house feel like a home again. You're—" He paused, struggling with words that carried too much weight for casual conversation. "You're someone I can't afford to lose." The admission hung in the air between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric and impossible to ignore. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the shift in their relationship, the moment when professional boundaries dissolved into something far more personal and infinitely more complicated. "Luca," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied, understanding what she couldn't quite say. "I know it's complicated. I know the timing is impossible. I know I have no right to ask you to risk your safety for our happiness. But I'm asking anyway." His hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Stay, Maya. Help us be a family. Let us protect you while you protect him." Maya felt herself leaning into his touch, despite every rational voice in her head warning her about the dangers of mixing emotional attachment with professional obligation. But rational thought seemed less important than the warmth of his palm against her skin, the way he was looking at her like she held the key to everything he had been afraid to hope for. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, and the promise felt like both a declaration of love and a declaration of war. Luca's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Good," he said softly, "because tomorrow things get more complicated." "How much more complicated?" Tony found evidence that someone's been watching the estate, professional surveillance, not just curious neighbours. Luca's expression hardened, the tender moment giving way to the steel beneath. "Which means whoever is testing us has decided you're worth keeping tabs on." Maya felt a familiar chill of recognition, the sensation of being in someone's crosshairs. But along with the fear came something else, a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with her professional training and everything to do with the sleeping child down the hall and the man standing close enough to kiss. "Then we'd better make sure they don't like what they see," she said quietly. Luca's answering smile was sharp and predatory, the expression of a man who had built his empire by turning other people's threats into his advantages. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." As he left her room, Maya understood that the peaceful domesticity of the past 3 weeks had been an illusion, a brief interlude before the real test began. Tomorrow she would discover what it truly meant to be part of the Romano family, what prices were expected, and what protection was possible in a world where love and violence existed in constant tension. But tonight she stood at her window and watched the security patrol complete their rounds, no longer feeling like an observer of Luca's dangerous world, but like someone who belonged to it, someone who had chosen to be visible, to be valuable, to be vulnerable in service of something larger than her own safety. The storm had passed, but Maya suspected it had only been the first of many. and somewhere in the darkness beyond the estate's walls, unseen watchers continued their patient surveillance of the woman who had become precious to the most dangerous man in New York. The real game was about to begin. The Belmont Casino sat on the Hudson River like a glittering fortress, its Art Deco facade hiding the kind of high-stakes negotiations that never appeared in newspapers. Maya studied the building through the tinted windows of Luca's Bentley, noting the valet stands positioned for quick escapes and the subtle placement of security personnel who looked more like former military than hospitality staff. "Second thoughts?" Luca asked, adjusting the cuffs of his midnight black Tom Ford tuxedo. He looked like he had stepped from the pages of a magazine, dangerous and elegant in equal measure, every inch the successful businessman who commanded respect through presence rather than bluster. "Just tactical assessment," Maya replied, smoothing the silk of her own dress, a midnight blue Valentino that had appeared in her closet that morning, along with matching heels and jewellery that probably cost more than her former annual salary. "Force of habit." The dress had been Luca's choice, and wearing it felt like donning armour designed by someone who understood both protection and seduction. The neckline was modest, but the fit was devastating, accentuating every curve while allowing for full range of motion. Maya had noted the reinforced seams that would withstand sudden movement, and the strategic placement of the beading that would help disguise any weapons she might need to conceal. Not that she was officially armed tonight. Officially, she was simply Luca Romano's girlfriend, accompanying him to a charity gala hosted by the Riverside Foundation for Children's Hospital. Unofficially, she was his early warning system, the former combat medic whose trained eye might spot threats that his usual security team would miss. "The Torino family will be here tonight," Luca said as they approached the valet station. "Vincent and his son Marcus, possibly his nephew Antonio. They've been the source of our recent territorial pressure." Maya filed away the names and descriptions Luca provided, creating mental files for each potential threat. Vincent Torino, 62, old school but ruthless. Marcus, 35, ambitious and volatile. Antonio, 28, college-educated but with a reputation for unnecessary violence. "What's their play?" "Unknown, but Vincent requested this meeting specifically, and he's not the type to make social calls." Luca's smile was sharp as he helped her from the car. "Which is why you're here." The valet who took their keys was polite and efficient, but Maya noted the way his eyes tracked their movement and the discreet earpiece that suggested he was more than just parking attendant. Everything about this place screamed high-end security theatre, the kind of elaborate performance designed to make dangerous people feel safe while conducting dangerous business. Inside, the casino had been transformed for the evening's charity event. The gaming tables were covered with white linens and elegant floral arrangements, creating intimate conversation areas where business could be conducted under the guise of philanthropy. A jazz quartet played in one corner, while uniformed servers circulated with champagne and canapés that probably cost more per plate than most people's weekly grocery budget. Maya accepted a glass of champagne she wouldn't drink and began her surveillance, cataloguing exits and identifying potential threats while maintaining the appearance of a woman admiring the venue's opulent decor. The crowd was exactly what she had expected, a mixture of legitimate businessmen, political figures, and individuals whose wealth came from sources that didn't appear on tax returns. Luca. The voice was smooth, cultured, carrying just enough warmth to seem genuine without actually being friendly. Maya turned to see Vincent Torino approaching, a silver-haired man in his 60s who moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to command. His son Marcus flanked him, younger and broader, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Vincent!" Luca's greeting was equally polite and equally hollow. "Thank you for hosting such a worthy cause." "Children's hospitals are close to my heart," Vincent replied, his gaze shifting to Maya with obvious appraisal. "And you must be the famous Maya Chen. I've heard quite a bit about you." Maya felt ice form in her veins at the casual way he used her full name, the implication that she had been researched and discussed among people who had no business knowing she existed. "All good things, I hope," she said lightly, extending her hand with a smile that felt like broken glass. Vincent's handshake lingered longer than necessary, his fingers calloused in a way that suggested he hadn't always been a man who wore $1,000 suits. "Indeed, former military, I understand. Impressive credentials for someone so young." The words were delivered with the kind of casual menace that made Maya's training kick into overdrive. This wasn't social conversation, this was a message. Vincent Torino knew who she was, what she had done, and wanted her to understand that her presence in Luca's life had not gone unnoticed. "I like to stay busy," Maya replied, her voice carrying the kind of steel that had once made Taliban fighters think twice about engaging her unit. "Idle hands and all that." Vincent's laugh was genuine, appreciative. "I can see why Luca keeps you close. Beauty and brains, a dangerous combination." Marcus stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space in a way that was clearly calculated to intimidate. "Dad, you didn't mention how pretty she was. Maybe we should get to know each other better." Maya felt Luca tense beside her, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the inside of his jacket. But before he could respond, Maya turned toward Marcus with a smile that would have made a shark nervous. "That's very flattering," she said sweetly, "but I'm already spoken for, and besides, I don't think your girlfriend would appreciate the competition." Marcus frowned, clearly not expecting to be deflected so smoothly. "How did you—" "Lipstick on your collar that doesn't match anything a man would choose for himself, and you keep checking your phone like someone's expecting you to report in regularly." Maya's smile never wavered. "She's pretty, by the way. Redhead, probably early 20s. You should be more careful about leaving evidence." Vincent's eyebrows rose appreciatively, while Marcus flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "I think I'm observant," Maya replied calmly. "It's kept me alive in places where being wrong meant coming home in a box." The temperature around their little group seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vincent studied Maya with renewed interest, while Marcus looked like he wanted to escalate the confrontation into something that would require security intervention. "Gentlemen," Luca said smoothly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended arguments before they began. "Perhaps we should find somewhere more private to discuss business. Maya, would you mind giving us a few minutes?" Maya understood the dismissal for what it was, Luca's attempt to protect her from whatever ugly negotiation was about to unfold. But she also understood that leaving now would send the wrong message to men who were clearly testing her relationship to their primary target. "Of course," she said, rising gracefully. "I wanted to check out the auction items anyway. The hospital's pediatric wing could use our support." As she walked away, Maya felt the weight of multiple gazes tracking her movement. Not just the Torinos, but other figures scattered throughout the gala who had taken notice of the brief confrontation. She was being evaluated, assessed for strengths and weaknesses by people who collected that kind of information for future use. Maya positioned herself near the auction display, close enough to observe Luca's table, while maintaining the appearance of studying a signed basketball that was probably worth more than most people's cars. From this vantage point, she could see the conversation growing more intense, Vincent leaning forward with the kind of smile that preceded ultimatums, while Marcus's hand kept drifting toward his jacket in a gesture that suggested he was armed and eager to prove it. "Beautiful evening for a charity event." Maya didn't turn at the sound of the voice behind her, but her entire body went on alert. The speaker was close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck, close enough to be a threat if he chose to be. "Very generous crowd," she agreed, using the reflection in the display case's glass to study the man behind her. Mid-30s, expensive suit, but something in his posture that screamed law enforcement or military. "Are you a regular supporter of children's hospitals?" "More of a patron of the arts, actually, photography specifically." The The man moved to stand beside her, and Maya got her first clear look at Antonio Torino. Vincent's nephew was younger than his file photo suggested, with intelligent eyes and the kind of smile that probably charmed people right up until he killed them. "I've been working on a project recently, portraits of interesting women in their natural environments." Maya's blood turned to ice. Photography. Surveillance. This was Vincent's message, delivered through his nephew with the casual cruelty of a man who enjoyed psychological warfare. "Sounds like fascinating work," Maya said, her voice level, despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. "What kind of subjects do you prefer?" "Women who think they're invisible," Antonio replied, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what appeared to be a photo gallery. "You'd be amazed how many people go about their daily lives completely unaware that they're being watched." He turned the phone so Maya could see the screen, and her heart stopped. The photos were of her, leaving her old apartment in Chinatown, visiting her mother's care facility, walking through Central Park with Carlo and Luca. Weeks of surveillance, professional and thorough, documenting every movement of her supposedly secure new life. "Beautiful work," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Though I imagine some subjects might object to being photographed without permission." "That's what makes it art," Antonio replied, his smile widening. "The authenticity that comes from people being themselves when they don't know anyone's watching." Maya understood the threat now, clear and unmistakable. The Torinos had been watching her, learning her patterns, building a profile that could be used against her if Luca didn't give them whatever they wanted. They knew about her mother's care facility, about Carlo's school, about every vulnerability that could be exploited. "You know," Maya said conversationally, "I've always found that the most interesting photographs are the ones where the subject is aware of the camera, when they're looking directly at the lens, challenging the viewer." She turned to face Antonio fully, meeting his gaze with the kind of direct stare that had once made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. "Those are the photos that tell you who someone really is beneath the surface." Antonio's smile faltered slightly as he recognized the steel beneath her polite facade. Interesting perspective. Most people prefer candid shots. "Most people haven't been shot at by professionals," Maya replied sweetly. "It changes your relationship to being observed." Before Antonio could respond, Maya heard the scrape of chairs being pushed back too quickly across the room. She turned to see Luca standing at his table, his face a mask of controlled fury, while Vincent and Marcus remained seated with expressions of satisfied malice. The negotiation had clearly not gone well. Maya excused herself from Antonio and moved toward Luca, noting the way other patrons were beginning to take notice of the tension radiating from their corner of the room. Whatever had been discussed, it had pushed Luca past his considerable capacity for diplomatic restraint. "Ready to go?" Maya asked quietly as she reached his side. "More than ready," Luca replied through gritted teeth. "Vincent, Marcus, always a pleasure." "The pleasure was mine," Vincent said, standing to shake Luca's hand with the kind of grip that suggested future violence. "I hope you'll give serious consideration to our discussion." As they walked toward the exit, Maya could feel the weight of every gaze in the room following their movement. Whatever message the Torinos had wanted to send, it had been delivered with the kind of public theatre that would be discussed and analysed throughout the city's criminal community within hours. Maya maintained her composure until they were safely in the Bentley, pulling away from the casino with the smooth efficiency that suggested their driver was accustomed to quick departures. Only then did she allow herself to process the full implications of what had just occurred. "What did they want?" she asked. Luca was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights streaming past their windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained rage. "Territory. 3 of my most profitable operations transferred to their control within 30 days. He turned to look at Maya, and she saw something that might have been fear lurking behind his anger. along with assurance that I won't interfere with their expansion into legitimate businesses. And if you refuse, they made it clear that refusal would have consequences for people I care about. Luca's hand found hers in the darkness of the car's interior. Starting with you. Maya felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The surveillance, the territorial pressure, tonight's public confrontation. It had all been leading to this moment when the Torinos would force Luca to choose between his business empire and the people he loved. They showed me photos, Maya said quietly. Antonio had been watching me for weeks. He knows about my mother, about Carlo's school, about everywhere I go. Luca's grip on her hand tightened to the point of pain. Son of a bitch! I should have seen this coming. You couldn't have known they'd target me specifically. I should have protected you better, should have been more careful about bringing you into public events where they could make contact. Luca's voice was filled with self-recrimination. This is my fault. Maya studied his profile in the passing streetlights, seeing the weight of responsibility that came with loving people in a world where love could be weaponized against you. She understood now why he had been alone for 2 years after Elena's death, why he had kept his heart carefully guarded against anyone who might become a liability. "Luca," she said softly, "look at me." He turned, and Maya saw the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, the fear of losing someone else to the violence that shadowed his chosen profession. "I'm not Elena," Maya said firmly. "I'm not a civilian who needs to be protected from your world. I'm a soldier who chose to be here, who understood the risks and accepted them. That doesn't make this right. No, it doesn't, but it makes it manageable." Maya's voice carried the confidence of someone who had faced down worse odds and survived. "They're using me to pressure you because they think I'm a weakness. They're wrong." Luca's smile was slight but genuine. "What do you suggest?" Maya thought about Antonio's photos, Vincent's casual threats, Marcus's barely concealed violence. She thought about Carlo asleep at home, trusting her to keep him safe. She thought about her mother in the care facility, vulnerable and dependent on Maya's protection. Most of all, she thought about the man beside her, who had offered her a chance at visibility and belonging despite the danger it brought to them both. "I suggest we show them exactly how wrong they are," Maya said quietly. "But first, we need to know if there's anyone in your organization who might be feeding them information." Luca's expression darkened. "What makes you think that?" "Because they knew too much. About my background, about tonight's meeting, about details that should have been internal to your security team." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Someone's been talking, Luca, and until we know who, everyone around you is a potential threat." The implication hung between them like a live wire. If there was a betrayer in Luca's organization, then nowhere was truly safe. Not the estate, not his business operations, not even the carefully controlled environment of tonight's gala. As they pulled through the gates of the Romano compound, Maya understood that their peaceful domesticity of the past few weeks had been built on foundations that were already cracking. Tomorrow they would begin the dangerous work of identifying the enemy within while protecting against the threats without. But tonight she wanted to focus on what was worth fighting for. The sleeping child who trusted her to keep him safe. The man who had risked everything to make her visible again. The fragile family they had built together against impossible odds. Maya Chen had spent 3 years learning to be invisible. Now she was about to discover what it meant to be the most visible target in the most dangerous game in New York. The real war was about to begin. The Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered like a battlefield dressed for a funeral. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 500 guests who had paid $10,000 per plate to support the Romano Family Foundation's annual charity gala, though Maya suspected most of them were there to witness whatever blood would be spilled before midnight. She stood before the full-length mirror in the hotel's presidential suite, adjusting the straps of her black Armani gown while running through her tactical assessment one final time. The dress was a masterpiece of functional elegance, Kevlar-lined bodice disguised as couture boning, hem length that allowed for full range of motion, and discreet access points for the weapons she had chosen, despite Luca's protests. The Glock 19 nestled against her right thigh in a custom holster that had cost more than most people's cars. 2 backup magazines in specially designed pockets that looked like decorative pleating. A ceramic knife with a 4-inch blade hidden in the modified underwire of her bra. Maya had learned long ago that the best armour was the kind your enemies didn't know you were wearing. "You look beautiful," Luca said from the doorway, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern that had become familiar over the past week of preparation. "And terrifying." Maya turned to study him in his black Tom Ford tuxedo, noting the subtle modifications that marked him as more than just another wealthy philanthropist. The jacket cut to accommodate shoulder holsters, the shoes with reinforced steel toes, the watch that was probably equipped with a panic button connected directly to Tony's command center. "Good," she replied, checking her earpiece one final time. "Tonight, terrifying might be the only thing that keeps us alive." The intelligence Tony had gathered over the past week painted a grim picture. Rico Romano, Luca's younger brother and second in command, had been feeding information to the Torinos for 6 months. Meeting schedules, security protocols, family routines, everything Vincent needed to pressure Luca into submission. Tonight's gala was supposed to be Rico's masterpiece, a public execution disguised as a charity event that would eliminate Luca and install Rico as the new head of the Romano organization. "Carlo is secure?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "Safe house in Connecticut with our most trusted security team. Tony's wife is with him. He thinks it's a special sleepover." Luca's smile was strained. He doesn't know his father might not come home. Maya moved to him, adjusting his bow tie with steady fingers that belied the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We're coming home, Luca, all of us." "You could still leave, get in the car, drive to the safe house, wait this out." His hands covered hers, warm and slightly trembling. "No one would blame you." "I would." Maya met his dark gaze directly. "And more importantly, Carlo would never forgive me if I let something happen to his papa." Luca's laugh was rough, desperate. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and perfectly timed. Maya felt her chest tighten with emotions she had spent years suppressing, feelings that had no place in a tactical situation, but somehow felt essential to everything they were about to face. "I love you too," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the desperate tenderness of someone who understood they might not get another chance. "Now let's go show your brother what happens when someone threatens our family." The elevator ride to the ballroom felt like descending into the arena, each floor marking their transition from private people into public targets. Maya ran through her mental checklist one final time, exit routes mapped, backup plans established, emergency protocols confirmed. Tony and his team were already in position throughout the hotel, but Maya knew that when the shooting started, she and Luca would be on their own until help could reach them. The ballroom doors opened to reveal a scene of obscene elegance. Politicians and business leaders mingled with criminals and socialites, all united by their willingness to pay enormous sums to be seen at the most exclusive charity event in the city. The Romano Foundation did genuine good work. Children's hospitals, educational programs, disaster relief. But tonight it was serving as cover for something far uglier. "Showtime," Luca murmured, his hand settling possessively on Maya's lower back as they entered the ballroom. Maya immediately began her surveillance, cataloguing faces and positions while maintaining the appearance of a woman admiring the venue's magnificent decor. Vincent Torino held court at a table near the stage, surrounded by his key lieutenants and several men Maya didn't recognize, but whose posture screamed professional killers. Marcus was positioned near the kitchen entrance, perfectly placed to coordinate an assault from the service corridors. Antonio lurked near the bar, his photographer's eyes scanning for targets and opportunities. But it was Rico Romano who captured Maya's attention, standing near the auction display with the kind of nervous energy that suggested a man about to betray everything he had once held sacred. Luca's younger brother bore a strong family resemblance, the same dark hair, the same aristocratic features, but where Luca carried himself with earned authority, Rico radiated the desperate ambition of someone who had always lived in another man's shadow. "There," Maya said quietly, directing Luca's attention to their target. "He's already sweating, and the auction hasn't even started." "Guilt," Luca replied, his voice heavy with the kind of disappointment that comes from being betrayed by blood. "Rico was always weak, but I never thought he'd sell out his own family." The evening proceeded with agonizing normalcy for the first 2 hours. Speeches about the Foundation's work, presentations of donation checks, the careful choreography of wealthy people performing charity for an audience. Maya moved through the crowd beside Luca, playing her role as the successful businessman's elegant companion while tracking the subtle positioning of hostile forces throughout the room. At 9:47 p.m. everything began to unravel. Maya was returning from the ladies' room, a reconnaissance mission disguised as a powder break, when she noticed the servers. 3 new faces among the waitstaff, men whose movements were too controlled, too aware, whose eyes tracked guests with predatory interest rather than professional service. She recognized the type immediately, killers posing as catering staff, perfectly positioned to strike when the moment came. "Tony," she whispered into her earpiece, "we have hostile assets among the service staff. 3 men, northeast corner near the bar, southwest corner by the kitchen, and 1 floating near the head table." "Confirmed," Tony's voice crackled back. "Palace guards have been neutralized. These guys came in through service entrance 15 minutes ago." Maya felt ice form in her veins. Palace guards was Tony's code for the loyal Romano security personnel, who should have been screening all service staff. If they had been taken out, it meant the attack was imminent, and their protective perimeter had been compromised. She moved quickly back toward Luca, who was engaged in conversation with the mayor and 2 city council members near the stage. The positioning was deliberate. Rico had maneuvered his brother into the most exposed location in the ballroom, surrounded by civilians who would panic when the shooting started. "We need to move," Maya said quietly, appearing at Luca's side with a smile that probably looked natural to anyone not trained to read micro-expressions. "Now." Luca excused himself from the political conversation and allowed Maya to guide him toward what appeared to be the relative safety of the bar area. But Maya wasn't seeking safety. She was positioning them for the fight that was about to erupt, choosing ground that would give them tactical advantages when the civilized veneer collapsed into violence. "How long do we have?" Luca asked. "Not long. Rico's moving toward the exit, and Vincent's people are starting to spread out." Maya accepted a champagne glass from a legitimate server while scanning for immediate threats. "Kitchen staff are compromised, half the security team is down, and—" The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, casting the ballroom in hellish red that turned elegant evening wear into shadows and potential threats. Maya heard the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn, the sharp intake of breath that preceded screaming, the crash of overturned tables as 500 guests suddenly realized they were trapped in a kill zone. "Maya!" Luca's voice was sharp with alarm. "Here," she replied, already moving. Her Glock was in her hand before the first shot was fired, muscle memory overriding conscious thought as 3 years of civilian life evaporated like morning fog. "Stay behind me and move toward the service corridor." The first gunshots erupted from the kitchen entrance, automatic weapons fire that sent guests diving for cover behind tables and chairs that offered concealment but no real protection. Maya saw muzzle flashes in the darkness and immediately returned fire, her first 3 rounds taking down the shooter near the bar with surgical precision. More gunfire erupted from multiple positions throughout the ballroom. Vincent's men had positioned themselves perfectly, creating crossfire patterns that would have been devastating if Maya hadn't spent 2 tours learning how to fight in exactly these conditions. "Down!" Maya shouted, tackling Luca behind the overturned bar as bullets chewed through the mahogany where his head had been. Glass exploded around them, champagne and wine mixing with blood on the marble floor as the civilized charity gala transformed into a battlefield. Maya rolled to her left, coming up in a shooting stance that her military instructors would have recognized, and put 2 rounds centre mass into a gunman advancing from the kitchen. The man dropped like a marionette with cut strings, his weapon clattering across the floor. "We need to reach the exit," Luca said, his own pistol now in his hand. "If we can get to the stairwell—" "No." Maya's voice was calm, focused, carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat. "That's what they want. They've herded us exactly where Rico told them we'd go. We go through them, not around them." She popped up long enough to assess the tactical situation. Vincent's men were advancing in a coordinated pattern, professional and disciplined, but not expecting serious resistance from their targets. They had planned for a businessman and his girlfriend, not a combat veteran who had learned urban warfare in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Maya smiled in the darkness, feeling the familiar calm that came with accepting violence as the solution to her immediate problems. "Vincent," she called out, her voice carrying across the ballroom chaos, "you brought knives to a gunfight." Her next shots were deliberate and devastating. The gunman near the auction table went down with a throat shot that silenced his screams before they began. His partner tried to take cover behind a pillar and caught Maya's 4th and 5th rounds through the gaps in his concealment. "Jesus," Luca breathed, watching Maya work with clinical efficiency. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Afghanistan," Maya replied, ejecting her spent magazine and slamming in a fresh one with movements so fluid they appeared choreographed. "Helmand province, specifically. The Taliban taught me that hesitation gets good people killed." More movement from the kitchen. Maya saw Antonio Torino emerge with an AK-47, his photographer's eye now focused on acquiring targets for maximum carnage. She put him in her sights and squeezed the trigger twice, watching him spin and drop as her rounds found their mark. "Maya, behind you!" Luca's warning came just in time. Maya spun to see Rico Romano emerging from behind the stage, his own weapon trained on his brother with the kind of desperate fury that came from years of accumulated resentment. "You always thought you were better than me," Rico snarled, blood running from a scalp wound that suggested he had already been in the fighting. "Always the golden child, always Papa's favourite. Well, tonight the family gets new leadership." Maya didn't hesitate, didn't negotiate, didn't try to reason with a man whose betrayal had put Carlo in danger and threatened the only real family she had known since leaving the army. She put 3 rounds into Rico Romano's chest, watching Luca's brother fold backward with the surprised expression of a man who had never quite understood that actions had consequences. "You never were smart enough to lead this family," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying no satisfaction, only grim necessity. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could hear sirens in the distance, the sound of Tony's backup teams finally reaching the ballroom, the moans of wounded guests who had survived the crossfire. But the immediate threat was over, ended by a former army medic who had learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to destroy what threatens it. Maya lowered her weapon and turned to Luca, seeing something that might have been awe in his dark eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked, already conducting a visual assessment for wounds. "No," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But Maya, I just protected our family," she said simply. "That's what I'm here for." Luca reached for her then, pulling her against his chest with desperate intensity. Maya could feel him trembling, whether from adrenaline or shock or the aftermath of watching his brother die. She couldn't tell. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "God help me, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone." "I love you too," Maya replied, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability before the police arrived and the questions began. "We're safe now. Carlo's safe. That's all that matters." As Tony's security team secured the ballroom and paramedics began treating the wounded, Maya understood that she had crossed a line tonight that could never be uncrossed. She had killed to protect her chosen family, had embraced the violence that came with loving someone in Luca's world. There would be consequences. Police investigations, media attention, questions about how a former army medic had ended up in a shootout at a charity gala. But Maya found she didn't care about any of that. She had chosen to be visible, to be valuable, to be vulnerable in service of something larger than her own survival. Tonight, that choice had been tested in the most brutal way possible, and she had not been found wanting. Maya Chen was no longer invisible. She was a queen who had proven herself in battle, a protector who had defended her crown with lethal precision. And tomorrow she would begin the work of ruling beside the king she had chosen to love, in a world where power was earned through courage and maintained through strength. The waitress was gone. Long live the queen. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and blood, a familiar combination that reminded Maya of field stations in Afghanistan, where the line between life and death was measured in milliseconds, and the skill of overtrained medics working with inadequate supplies. But this wasn't a war zone. This was Mount Sinai Hospital at 4:27 a.m., where she sat beside Luca's bed watching him sleep while federal agents prepared their questions in the hallway outside. Maya touched the bandage covering the bullet graze on her left shoulder, a souvenir from Rico's final desperate shots before she had put him down permanently. The wound was superficial, barely worth the medical attention it had received, but the emergency room staff had insisted on treating the civilian victim, who had somehow survived a coordinated assassination attempt with minimal injuries. They had no idea they were patching up a woman who had killed 4 men in under 3 minutes, using skills learned in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Luca stirred in the hospital bed, his right shoulder heavily bandaged where Rico's bullet had torn through muscle and grazed bone. The wound would heal cleanly. No permanent damage, no loss of function. But Maya knew the deeper injury would take longer to recover from. Being betrayed by blood left scars that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with trust. "How long have I been out?" Luca's voice was rough from the anesthesia, but his eyes were alert and focused. 6 hours. The doctors wanted to keep you sedated longer, but I told them you had responsibilities that couldn't wait. Maya moved closer to the bed, careful not to disturb the IV lines. "Tony's been handling the immediate aftermath. The FBI is calling it a terrorist attack on a charity event. Somehow, all the evidence of family business has mysteriously disappeared." Luca's smile was weak but genuine. "Tony's good at making inconvenient evidence disappear. How many casualties?" 7 dead, 14 wounded. All the fatalities were Vincent's men or Rico's people. Maya's voice was clinical, professional, the tone of someone delivering a situation report rather than discussing a massacre. No innocent civilians died, though several of the wounded were donors who got caught in the crossfire. The media? Calling you a hero. Prominent businessman survives terror attack at Children's Hospital fundraiser. Your foundation is getting donations from people who want to show support for your survival. Maya's expression darkened. They have no idea what actually happened in that ballroom. Luca was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of their very public survival. And the Torino family? Vincent's in federal custody pending investigation into his terrorist connections. Marcus disappeared sometime during the shooting. Tony thinks he's halfway to Sicily by now. Antonio won't be disappearing anywhere. Maya met Luca's gaze steadily. I made sure of that. The weight of what she had done settled between them like a physical presence. Maya had crossed a line last night that could never be uncrossed, had embraced the violence that came with protecting what she loved. She was no longer the invisible waitress who had once served dinner to strangers. She was a woman who had killed to defend her family, and both she and Luca understood that this changed everything about who she was and what she could become. "Any regrets?" Luca asked quietly. Maya considered the question seriously, thinking about Rico's surprised expression as her bullets found their mark, about Antonio's camera falling from his dead fingers, about the weight of the Glock in her hands as she systematically eliminated threats to the people she loved. "None," she said finally. "They threatened Carlo, they threatened you, they threatened everything I've come to care about." She leaned forward, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I would do it again without hesitation." Luca's hand found hers, his fingers warm and steady despite the pain medication. "That makes you dangerous, Maya. More dangerous than most of the people in my world will ever understand." "Good," she replied. "Dangerous means they'll think twice before coming after our family again." The door opened to admit Agent Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, a woman in her 40s whose FBI credentials and no-nonsense demeanour suggested this wasn't her first investigation into organised crime violence. She was accompanied by a younger agent whose aggressive posture and suspicious glare marked him as someone who had already decided Maya and Luca were guilty of something worth prosecuting. "Mr. Romano, I'm Agent Chen, FBI. I need to ask you some questions about last night's incident." The older agent positioned herself where she could observe both Maya and Luca, her experienced eyes noting details that would inform her questioning strategy. "Are you feeling well enough to talk?" "Of course," Luca replied, his voice carrying the careful courtesy of someone accustomed to dealing with law enforcement. "I want to help however I can. What happened last night was a tragedy." Agent Chen opened her tablet and began recording. "Walk me through the evening from your perspective. When did you first realize something was wrong?" Luca's account was masterful, truthful but carefully edited, presenting himself as a businessman and philanthropist who had been targeted by criminals with unknown motives. He described the charity gala, the sudden blackout, the panic and confusion as gunfire erupted. His story painted him as a victim rather than a participant, a man who had fought for survival rather than engaging in criminal warfare. Maya listened with professional admiration as Luca navigated questions that could have destroyed his carefully constructed, legitimate facade. He never lied directly, but he omitted details that would have interested federal prosecutors while emphasizing elements that supported his cover story. "Ms. Chen." Agent Chen turned her attention to Maya with the kind of focused intensity that suggested extensive preparation. "Your background is quite interesting. Military service, combat experience, medical training. How did you end up working for the Romano family?" "Household management," Maya replied calmly. "Mr. Romano's son requires specialized care due to trauma-related selective mutism. My background in military medicine qualified me to help with his therapeutic needs." "And last night? Walk me through your experience." Maya's account was even more carefully crafted than Luca's. She described herself as a trained medic who had found herself in a combat situation, relying on military experience to survive an unexpected attack. Her weapon had been carried legally with proper permits. Her actions had been defensive, protecting herself and her employer from armed assailants who had opened fire on innocent civilians. "4 men died from gunshot wounds consistent with your weapon," the younger agent interjected aggressively. "That's quite a lot of defensive shooting." Maya met his gaze with the kind of steady stare that had once made Taliban fighters reconsider their life choices. "Agent?" "Rodriguez." "Agent Rodriguez, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. I was trained to neutralize threats quickly and efficiently while protecting wounded personnel under fire." Maya's voice carried the authority of someone stating facts rather than making excuses. "When armed men began shooting at civilians, including my employer, I responded with appropriate force to stop the threat." "Appropriate force?" Agent Rodriguez repeated skeptically. "You killed 4 people." I stopped 4 people from killing anyone else, Maya corrected. If that troubles your conscience, I suggest you take it up with the families of the 14 civilians who went home alive because those 4 men couldn't continue shooting. Agent Chen held up a hand to forestall her partner's response. Ms. Chen, the ballistics report shows remarkable accuracy under extremely difficult conditions. Headshots, centre mass, throat shots. These weren't panic shots from a frightened civilian. No, they weren't, Maya agreed. They were precisely placed shots from a trained soldier who understood that missing meant innocent people would die. She leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying steel. Agent Chen, I assume you've reviewed my military record. You know I received 2 commendations for actions under fire, including pulling wounded soldiers out of a Taliban ambush while providing covering fire. Last night was Tuesday for me. The federal agents exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that they were dealing with someone whose background made her actions legally justifiable, even if morally complex. Maya had been careful to stay within the boundaries of legitimate self-defense, protecting others while defending herself against armed attackers. One more question, Agent Chen said. Rico Romano. He was found with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, fired from close range. The witnesses we've interviewed say he was shooting at his brother when you engaged him. Maya felt Luca tense beside her, understanding that this was the crucial moment where their story would either hold together or fall apart under scrutiny. Rico Romano was firing an automatic weapon into a crowd of panicking civilians, Maya said quietly. He had already wounded his brother and was continuing to shoot when I stopped him. She met Agent Chen's gaze directly. I don't know what his motivations were, and frankly I didn't care. He was killing innocent people, and I had the training and position to stop him. Even though he was your employer's brother. Especially because he was family, Maya replied with absolute conviction. Betrayal from blood is the worst kind of violence, Agent Chen. It destroys everything that should be sacred about trust and loyalty. The interview continued for another hour, but Maya could see that the federal agents were finding no inconsistencies in their carefully constructed narrative. The evidence supported their story of civilians defending themselves against an unprovoked attack by criminals with unknown motives. The media coverage portrayed them as survivors rather than participants, and the political pressure to close the case quickly was enormous. When the agents finally left, Maya slumped back in her chair, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours settling into her bones like lead. That went well, Luca said quietly. For now, but they'll keep watching, keep investigating. Your world just became much more visible to federal law enforcement. Maya met his gaze steadily. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Luca was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of their survival and its aftermath. Maya, last night changed everything. Not just because of the violence, but because of what it proved about who you are and what you're willing to do for this family. What are you saying? I'm saying that I want to make this official, not just the relationship between us, but your position in the organization. Luca's voice carried the weight of a decision that had clearly been building since the moment she had killed Rico to protect him. I want to marry you, Maya, not just because I love you, but because I need you beside me as an equal partner in everything I do. Maya felt her breath catch at the directness of his proposal, the way he was offering not just his heart, but his empire. Luca, I know it's complicated, I know the timing is insane, but watching you fight last night, seeing you protect our family without hesitation, I realized that you're not just someone I love. You're someone I need. His hand tightened on hers. The organization needs someone with your skills, your integrity, your absolute loyalty to family above everything else. Maya understood what he was really asking. Not just marriage, but transformation from invisible caregiver to visible queen. From someone who worked for the Romano family to someone who ruled beside its head. It was everything she had never allowed herself to dream of. Power, belonging, the chance to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day. "What about Carlo?" she asked. Luca's smile was warm, genuine. "Carlo asked me yesterday if you were going to be his new mama officially. When I asked him how he felt about that, he said he thought you should be the one to decide if you wanted a family like ours." His voice roughened with emotion. "Maya, he loves you, not as a replacement for Elena, but as someone who chose to love him when she couldn't anymore." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she thought about the 8-year-old boy who had trusted her with his telescope, his drawings, his mother's memory. The child who called her his family and meant it with the absolute faith that only children possess. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be Carlo's mother. Yes, I'll be your partner in everything." Maya leaned forward to kiss him gently, tasting the promise of a future neither of them had dared hope for. "But I have conditions." Luca's laugh was rough with relief and joy. "Name them. No secrets between us, ever. If you're planning something that could put Carlo in danger, I need to know so I can protect him." Maya's voice carried absolute conviction. "And any business that involves children or families is off limits. I won't be part of an organization that profits from hurting people who can't protect themselves." "Done," Luca agreed immediately. "Anything else?" Maya smiled, feeling the last of her invisible armor falling away. "Just one thing. When we get married, I want Carlo to be the one who gives me away. Elena isn't here to see her son get a new mother, but she should be represented in the ceremony by the most important person in both our lives." Luca's eyes filled with tears that he didn't bother to hide. "She would have loved you so much, Maya. Elena always said the best families were the ones you chose rather than the ones you were born into." As they sat together in the sterile hospital room, planning a future built on love and violence in equal measure, Maya understood that she had finally found what she had been searching for since her father's death had shattered her first family. Not just love, but belonging. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just visibility, but the power to protect what mattered most. Maya Chen had entered Luca Romano's world as an invisible waitress, desperate for economic salvation. She was leaving the hospital as his equal partner, a woman who had proven her loyalty in blood and earned her crown through courage. The transformation was complete. The Queen was about to claim her throne. And somewhere in Connecticut, an 8-year-old boy was waiting for his new family to come home from the war that had finally ended in their victory. 6 months after the Meridian Hotel massacre, Maya Romano stood in the marble foyer of Romano Enterprises, watching spring rain streak the floor-to-ceiling windows while reviewing quarterly reports that showed legitimate business profits exceeding their most optimistic projections. The woman reflected in those windows bore little resemblance to the invisible waitress who had once served Giuseppe's restaurant. Designer Armani suit in charcoal grey, Italian leather heels that cost more than her former monthly rent, a confidence that came from power earned rather than inherited. But it was the wedding ring on her left hand that told the real story of her transformation. White gold and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, but more importantly, the symbol of a partnership built on blood and trust in equal measure. "Mrs. Romano!" The voice belonged to Janet Rodriguez, Maya's personal assistant, a former FBI analyst who had been carefully recruited after extensive background checks revealed both competence and a flexible relationship with traditional law enforcement boundaries. "Your 2 p.m. is here. Senator Morrison about the children's hospital funding." Maya smiled, remembering when a meeting with a United States senator would have been unimaginable. Now it was simply Tuesday afternoon business for the woman who had become the public face of Romano Enterprises' philanthropic operations. "Send him in," Maya said, settling behind her mahogany desk in the corner office that commanded views of Manhattan and the Hudson River. "And Janet, make sure the Meridian Foundation proposal is ready for his review. I want to show him exactly how his support translates into lives saved." The Meridian Foundation had been Maya's idea, a children's hospital charity named for the site of their victory, transforming a place of violence into a source of healing. In 6 months, they had raised $12 million for pediatric trauma centers across 3 states, money that came from donors who had no idea they were contributing to the pet project of a former combat medic who had killed 4 men to protect her family. Senator Morrison was a man in his 60s whose silver hair and practiced smile marked him as someone who had spent decades navigating the intersection of politics and money. But Maya had learned to read the tells that separated genuine allies from opportunistic parasites, and Morrison's body language suggested a man who actually cared about the legislation they were discussing. "Mrs. Romano, thank you for seeing me. The hospital funding bill has bipartisan support, but we need private sector commitment to demonstrate viability." Morrison settled into the chair across from her desk, pulling out a tablet filled with legislative details. "Your foundation's involvement would be exactly the kind of endorsement that moves senators off the fence." Maya reviewed the proposed legislation with the kind of detailed attention that had once been reserved for mission briefings in Afghanistan: federal funding for pediatric trauma centers, expanded mental health services for children, improved emergency response protocols, everything aligned perfectly with her vision for protecting vulnerable populations. "The Romano Foundation will commit $5 million over 3 years, Maya said without hesitation. "But I want guarantees about implementation oversight. Money without accountability becomes corruption, Senator. I've seen too much of that to tolerate it in programs meant to help children." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at the casual mention of $5 million, but his expression suggested appreciation rather than surprise. "Mrs. Romano, your reputation for protecting investments is well known. What kind of oversight were you thinking?" "Independent audit authority, quarterly site visits by foundation representatives, direct reporting on fund utilization." Maya leaned back in her chair, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Senator, I don't write checks and hope for the best. I write checks and make sure they accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish." The negotiation continued for 40 minutes, but Maya could see that Morrison understood he was dealing with someone who combined genuine philanthropic goals with the kind of operational sophistication that guaranteed results. By the time he left her office, the Romano Foundation had committed to the largest private donation in the bill's history, while securing oversight authority that would ensure every dollar reached its intended destination. Maya was reviewing the signed agreements when her intercom chimed with the distinctive tone that meant family business rather than legitimate corporate matters. "Maya?" Luca's voice carried warmth tinged with amusement. "Are you ready for the school pickup run, or should I handle Carlo duty today?" The question was routine. They had been alternating pickup responsibilities since Carlo's return to regular schooling, but Maya caught the undertone that suggested Luca wanted her perspective on something that had occurred during his day. "I'll get him," Maya replied. "Everything okay?" "Tony wants to brief us both tonight. Nothing urgent, just some intelligence about our competitor's recent reorganization efforts." Luca's tone remained light, but Maya understood that Tony's briefings were never truly routine. "Dinner first, business after Carlo's bedtime." "Perfect. See you at home." The drive to Carlo's school took Maya through neighbourhoods where she had once cleaned office buildings for minimum wage, past the Chinatown apartment building, where she had lived invisibly for 3 years. The contrast was not lost on her. From economic desperation to commanding resources that could reshape legislation, all because she had chosen to protect a child from a drunk with a broken bottle. St. Catherine's Academy was the kind of private school that educated the children of New York's power elite, a place where politicians' sons studied alongside the offspring of business leaders and carefully laundered criminal fortunes. Carlo fit seamlessly into this environment, his natural intelligence flourishing under the attention of teachers who understood that some students required specialized approaches to learning and socialization. Maya pulled into the pickup line in her black Mercedes, armoured naturally, though the modifications were invisible to casual observation, and watched for Carlo among the stream of children emerging from the brick and ivy buildings. She spotted him immediately, not just because of his Romano dark hair and serious expression, but because of the way he carried himself. Carlo walked with the confidence of a child who knew he was loved unconditionally, who understood that home meant safety and belonging rather than just shelter. The transformation in his posture over the past 6 months was as dramatic as her own metamorphosis, from invisible to visible. "Maya!" Carlo broke into a run when he saw her car, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders as he navigated through the careful choreography of pickup traffic. "Wait until you hear what happened in art class today." Maya leaned across to open the passenger door, noting the excited energy in Carlo's voice that suggested something significant rather than routine school news. Good day or bad day? Amazing day. Carlo buckled his seatbelt with the practiced efficiency of a child who understood that safety protocols were non-negotiable in the Romano household. "Mrs. Patterson said my drawing of our family was so good that she wants to enter it in the citywide art competition." Maya felt her chest tighten with pride and something deeper, the fierce protectiveness that came with loving a child who had chosen to include her in his definition of family. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What did you draw?" Carlo produced a rolled paper from his backpack, handling it with the reverence of someone presenting a masterpiece. The drawing showed their house in Westchester, rendered in careful detail down to the security gates and Rocco's favourite sleeping spot in the garden. But it was the figures standing on the front steps that made Maya's breath catch. 3 people holding hands, Luca in his business suit, Maya in her work clothes, and Carlo between them with a smile that radiated contentment. Above them, barely visible in the blue crayon sky, was a 4th figure with long dark hair and angel wings, watching over the family with benevolent approval. "That's Elena," Carlo said quietly, following Maya's gaze to the ethereal figure. "I wanted to show that she's still part of our family, even though she can't be here in person. Mrs. Patterson said that was very mature thinking for someone my age." Maya had to swallow hard before she could speak. "Carlo, this is beautiful. Your mama would be so proud of your talent and so proud of the young man you're becoming." "Do you think she would like you?" Carlo asked, the question carrying the weight of something he had clearly been thinking about for weeks. "I mean, really like you, not just approve because you take good care of me." Maya considered the question seriously, understanding that Carlo needed honest reassurance rather than empty platitudes. "I think she would appreciate that I love you exactly as you are, not as someone I'm trying to change. I think she would like that I want to protect your memories of her while helping you make new ones." Maya reached over to touch his hand gently. "And I think she would be happy that you feel safe enough to love someone new without forgetting how much she loved you." Carlo nodded solemnly, then brightened with the resilience that was becoming his signature characteristic. "Papa says you're pregnant. Is that why you've been eating crackers all the time?" Maya nearly swerved into oncoming traffic at the casual directness of the question. She and Luca had been planning to tell Carlo about the pregnancy over the weekend, but apparently 8-year-olds were more observant than adults gave them credit for. "How long have you known?" Maya asked, recovering her composure while negotiating the turn onto their street. 2 weeks. You stop drinking coffee and you get that funny look when anyone mentions food before noon." Carlo's grin was mischievous. "Plus, I heard Papa on the phone with his doctor friend asking about prenatal vitamins." Maya shook her head in amazement at the child's detective skills. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to have a baby. How do you feel about that?" "Are you kidding? I'm going to be the best big brother ever." Carlo's excitement was infectious, filling the car with the kind of joy that made Maya remember why she had fallen in love with this unconventional family. "I already started a list of everything I need to teach the baby, like how to draw and which books are the best, and how to tell when Papa is worried about work stuff." Maya pulled through the estate gates, noting the subtle but significant security improvements that had been implemented since the Meridian incident. More cameras, additional patrol routes, enhanced communication systems, all designed to ensure that their family's newfound happiness would be protected from anyone foolish enough to threaten it. The house itself had been transformed over the past 6 months, evolving from a museum of grief into a living home where laughter was more common than silence. Maya's books filled the shelves alongside Elena's, her plants thrived in the garden spaces, her photographs joined the family portraits that marked the passages of their shared life. But it was the nursery that represented the most dramatic change, a room that had been closed off since Elena's death, now painted in soft yellows and greens, filled with furniture that awaited the arrival of new life. Carlo had insisted on helping choose everything, approaching the task with the seriousness of someone who understood that this baby would be both blessing and responsibility. "Papa's home," Carlo announced as they entered the foyer, noting Luca's briefcase beside the hall table. "And something smells really good. Think Rosa made her special lasagna?" Rosa Benedetto, Tony's wife, had become their part-time cook and housekeeper, an arrangement that served dual purposes, providing domestic support while ensuring that trusted family members remained close to the household. Her lasagna had become Carlo's favourite meal, and the boy had developed an uncanny ability to identify her cooking from 3 rooms away. They found Luca in the kitchen, still wearing his business attire, but with his sleeves rolled up and tie loosened in the way that marked the transition from Don Romano to husband and father. He was reviewing what appeared to be architectural plans while monitoring something in the oven that suggested Rosa had indeed been cooking. "How was school?" Luca asked, embracing Carlo with the fierce affection that had become his standard greeting. "Maya saw my family drawing, and I told her about the baby, and Mrs. Patterson wants to enter my art in a competition," Carlo announced in a rush of excitement. "And Maya says Mama would have liked her, which I already knew, because Mama had good taste in people." Luca met Maya's eyes over Carlo's head, his expression mixing amusement with the kind of love that still made her breath catch after 6 months of marriage. "Busy afternoon for revelations." "Your son is observant," Maya said, accepting Luca's kiss, while Carlo pretended to be disgusted by parental affection. "We might want to be more careful about our private conversations. Or we could just assume that Carlo knows everything anyway and plan accordingly," Luca suggested with a laugh. He figured out Tony's surprise birthday party 3 weeks before the event. The evening proceeded with the comfortable rhythm they had established over months of learning to be a family. Dinner conversation that mixed Carlo's school adventures with carefully edited discussions of business developments. Homework supervision that involved all 3 adults reviewing Carlo's progress in subjects ranging from mathematics to Italian literature. Bath and bedtime routines that included story reading and the careful ritual of checking locks and ensuring Rocco was properly positioned for overnight protection. But after Carlo was asleep, the domestic tranquility gave way to the kind of serious business discussion that reminded Maya of why their happiness required constant vigilance. Tony arrived at 9 p.m. with the kind of intelligence briefing that had become routine since their elimination of the Torino threat. The Italian-American families were reorganizing in the aftermath of Vincent's federal imprisonment, but most were choosing cooperation over confrontation with the Romano organization. The Russians were expanding their money laundering operations, but staying clear of Romano territory. The Irish were dealing with internal succession issues that would keep them distracted for months. "Bottom line," Tony concluded, "our position is stronger than it's been in 5 years. The Meridian incident established Maya's reputation as someone not to be underestimated, and the legitimate business expansion is providing cover that even ambitious prosecutors would find difficult to penetrate." Maya reviewed the intelligence summaries with the same attention she had once given to enemy disposition reports in Afghanistan. The Romano organization was evolving from traditional criminal enterprise into something more sophisticated, a hybrid structure that used legitimate businesses to generate the majority of their revenue while maintaining the kind of enforcement capabilities that discouraged competitors from testing their boundaries. "What about the federal investigation?" Maya asked. Officially closed, Tony replied. Agent Chen's final report classified the Meridian incident as a terrorist attack by unknown perpetrators against a legitimate charity event. Your actions are on record as heroic civilian defense of innocent victims. Maya nodded, understanding that their survival had depended not just on superior firepower, but on superior story construction. The narrative that portrayed them as victims rather than participants had been carefully maintained through 6 months of media coverage, political pressure, and federal investigation. Any concerns about blowback from Vincent's conviction? Luca asked. None. Vincent took a plea deal that keeps him in minimum security for 12 years with no cooperation requirements. His remaining associates are more interested in avoiding attention than seeking revenge. Tony closed his briefing folder and met both their gazes. Boss, you and Maya have accomplished something I didn't think was possible. You've made this organization untouchable through legitimacy rather than just fear. After Tony left, Maya and Luca settled into their evening routine of reviewing the day's developments while planning the next day's priorities. But tonight, the conversation turned to subjects that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the life they were building together. Carlos thinks the baby will be a girl, Luca said, his hand resting on Maya's still flat stomach with proprietary tenderness. He's already planning to teach her how to draw and which books she'll need to read first. He's going to be an amazing big brother, Maya replied, covering his hand with hers. Though I suspect he'll be more protective than any girl will appreciate when she starts dating. She won't be dating until she's 30, Luca said firmly. Carlo and I have already discussed appropriate screening procedures for potential suitors. Maya laughed at the mock seriousness in his voice, but she understood the genuine emotion beneath the humour. This baby would be born into a family that had learned the hard way how precious and fragile happiness could be, and both men in her life would approach protection with the kind of thoroughness that came from having already lost someone irreplaceable. Luca, Maya said softly, are you happy, really genuinely happy with how everything has turned out? Luca was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. 6 months ago, I was a man who had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. I had a son who hadn't spoken to anyone except me in months, a business that was under constant threat, and a heart that I thought was too damaged to love anyone new. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight in ways that reminded Maya of their first conversation at Giuseppe's restaurant. Now I have a wife who makes me remember why I wanted to build something lasting instead of just maintaining something profitable. I have a son who laughs more than he cries and draws pictures of our family with genuine joy. I have a business that's stronger and more legitimate than it's ever been. Luca paused, his hand moving to rest over her heart. And in 6 months, I'll have a baby who will grow up knowing that family means choosing to protect each other rather than just sharing the same blood. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she thought about the journey that had brought them from that violent night at Giuseppe's to this peaceful evening in their shared home. I love you, she said simply. I love this life we've built together. I love that Carlo feels safe enough to plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. I love you too, Luca replied, kissing her with the tenderness of someone who had learned not to take such moments for granted. Maya Romano, queen of my heart and partner in everything that matters. As they settled into sleep in the master bedroom that had once been a monument to loss but was now a sanctuary of hope, Maya understood that her transformation was complete. She had evolved from invisible waitress to visible queen, from economic desperation to financial security, from solitary survival to family belonging. But more importantly, she had learned that true power came not from the ability to destroy your enemies, but from the capacity to protect what you loved. And tomorrow she would continue the work of ruling beside the man she had chosen, in service of the family they had built together, in a world where love and violence existed in constant tension, but love ultimately proved stronger. Maya Chen Romano, former combat medic, former invisible waitress, current queen of one of New York's most powerful families, slept peacefully in the arms of the man who had seen her true strength and chosen to make her his equal partner in everything. The waitress was gone forever. Long live the Queen. The rain was falling again as Maya's black Mercedes pulled up to Giuseppe's restaurant. The same gentle precipitation that had been washing Little Italy clean on that violent Friday night 8 months ago when her old life had died and her new one had been born. But today was Sunday afternoon, and the woman stepping out of the luxury vehicle bore no resemblance to the desperate waitress who had once served tables for survival wages. Maya Romano moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to command, her Brunello Cucinelli coat tailored to accommodate the gentle curve of her 6-month pregnancy, while concealing the fact that she was still armed out of habit rather than necessity. The Glock 19 rested comfortably against her ribs, a reminder that queens maintained their thrones through strength as well as strategy. "Mama, is this where you used to work?" Carlo asked, unbuckling his seatbelt and studying the modest storefront with the curiosity of a 9-year-old trying to understand how his mother had lived before becoming the most powerful woman he knew. "This is where I met your papa," Maya replied, helping him from the car while Luca emerged from the driver's seat. "Where I first decided that protecting what matters is more important than protecting yourself." Giuseppe's had changed hands twice since Maya's termination, and the current owner had restored the original 1960s decor with the kind of authentic attention to detail that attracted food tourists and local families in equal measure. The red vinyl booths gleamed under warm lighting, the checkered tablecloths were crisp and spotless, and the scent of garlic and oregano promised the kind of Italian comfort food that had made this neighbourhood famous. But it was table 12 that captured Maya's attention, the same booth where she had been wiping down surfaces when a drunk businessman had decided to terrorise a child with broken glass. The table where everything had started, where an invisible waitress had chosen to become visible by stepping between violence and innocence. "Mr. and Mrs. Romano, welcome to Giuseppe's." The hostess was young, enthusiastic, probably a college student working weekends to pay for textbooks and tuition. Her smile was genuine but nervous. Even in legitimate businesses, the Romano name carried weight that made service personnel eager to please. "Table 12, if it's available," Maya requested, noting the way the girl's eyes widened at the specific request. "It has sentimental value." They were seated immediately, despite the Sunday afternoon crowd that filled most of the dining room, with families enjoying traditional meals and couples sharing wine over intimate conversations. Maya slid into the booth where she had once knelt to protect Carlo from flying glass, running her fingers over the worn vinyl that held memories of pain and transformation. "Strange, isn't it?" Luca said quietly, settling beside her while Carlo studied the menu with the serious concentration he brought to all decisions. "Being back here as customers instead of desperate people trying to survive another day," Maya finished. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." Carlo looked up from his menu with the directness that had become his signature characteristic. "Papa, will you tell me the real story about that night? Not the kid version, but what actually happened?" Maya and Luca exchanged glances, recognizing the moment when their son's maturity had outgrown the carefully edited narrative they had maintained for his protection. Carlo was old enough now to understand that his family's happiness had been built on foundations that were both violent and necessary. "A drunk man tried to hurt you with broken glass," Luca said carefully. "Maya stepped between you and the danger, even though she didn't know us and had no reason to risk herself for strangers." "But that's not all of it, is it?" Carlo pressed, his dark eyes moving between his parents with the persistence of someone who had inherited both intelligence and stubbornness in equal measure. "Because Maya killed people to protect us, didn't she, at the charity party?" Maya felt her breath catch at the casual way Carlo referenced information he shouldn't have possessed. "How do you know about that?" "I listen when you think I'm not listening, and I read the newspapers that you think you've hidden from me." Carlo's expression was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Maya, I know you're dangerous when our family is threatened. I know that's part of why no one bothers us anymore." Maya studied her son, because that's what Carlo had become, her son in every way that mattered, and realized that he needed honesty more than protection from uncomfortable truths. "Yes," she said simply, "I killed people who were trying to kill your father. I would do it again without hesitation if anyone threatened our family." Carlo nodded, as though this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Good. That's what mothers are supposed to do, protect their children no matter what." The simple acceptance in his voice made Maya's chest tighten with emotions too complex for easy analysis. Carlo understood that love and violence could coexist when family was at stake, that protection sometimes required terrible choices, that the woman who made him hot chocolate when he had nightmares was the same woman who had executed his uncle to keep him safe. "Order for the Romano family?" The voice belonged to a young waitress who approached their table with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she understood exactly who she was serving. Maya looked up to see a girl who couldn't be more than 22, with tired eyes and cheap shoes that spoke of multiple jobs and economic desperation that felt achingly familiar. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Maya asked gently. "Jessica, ma'am. I'm sorry if I seem nervous. I just started last week, and my manager said you were very important customers." The girl's hands trembled slightly as she prepared to take their order, clearly terrified of making a mistake that might cost her the job she obviously needed. Maya saw herself in Jessica's posture, the careful invisibility, the hypervigilance for signs of customer displeasure, the exhaustion that came from working too hard for too little money. But more than that, she saw an opportunity to complete a circle that had begun with her own desperate need for help. "Jessica, how many jobs are you working right now?" Maya asked. "3, ma'am. Here on weekends, cleaning offices during the week, and some data entry at night when I can get it." Jessica's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had learned to normalize impossible schedules. "I'm trying to save for nursing school." Maya felt a familiar chill of recognition, remembering her own triple-job existence and the way economic pressure had made her invisible to everyone except the man who had chosen to see her potential instead of her desperation. "Nursing is a noble profession," Maya said. "My background is military medicine. I understand the calling." "Really?" Jessica's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Did you work in field hospitals? How did you transition to civilian healthcare? I have so many questions about trauma medicine and emergency protocols." Maya smiled at the girl's enthusiasm, seeing the intelligence and dedication beneath the economic exhaustion. "Why don't you bring us your recommendations for lunch, and then we can talk about your career plans? I know some people who might be able to help with scholarships and placement programs." After Jessica left to place their order, Carlo leaned across the table with the kind of conspiratorial excitement that suggested he understood they were witnessing something significant. "Are you going to help her like Papa helped you?" he asked. "Something like that," Maya replied, "though hopefully with less drama and violence." Luca's smile was warm, understanding. "You can't save everyone, Maya." "No, but I can save the ones who remind me of who I used to be." Maya's hand moved instinctively to her pregnant belly, thinking about the daughter who would be born into privilege and security, but who needed to understand that not everyone was so fortunate. "Our children need to see that power comes with responsibility to help people who haven't had our advantages." Lunch was excellent, the kind of traditional Italian cooking that had made this neighbourhood famous. But Maya found herself paying more attention to Jessica's service than to her food. The girl moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to maximize tips through attentiveness without being intrusive, the same skills Maya had once used to survive in the service industry. When Jessica brought their check, Maya was ready with more than just payment. "Jessica, I'd like to offer you a position with the Romano Foundation," Maya said, producing a business card that carried more weight than gold in certain circles. "We need a program coordinator for our medical scholarship initiative, someone who understands the challenges of working students and can identify candidates who have the drive to succeed despite financial obstacles." Jessica's eyes widened as she processed the implications of the offer. Mrs. Romano, that's incredibly generous, but I don't have the qualifications for that kind of position. You have the most important qualification. You've lived the experience our scholarship recipients are going through. Maya's voice carried the authority of someone who had learned that competence mattered more than credentials. The position pays $60,000 annually, includes full health benefits, and comes with tuition reimbursement for your nursing degree. The girl's hands shook as she looked at the business card, clearly struggling to process the sudden transformation of her economic prospects. This is real? You're serious? Completely serious, but Jessica... Maya's voice carried a gentle warning. This isn't charity. I expect excellence, dedication, and absolute integrity. Can you deliver that? Yes, ma'am, Jessica replied without hesitation. I won't let you down. Good. Call that number tomorrow morning and speak with Janet Rodriguez. She'll handle the paperwork and get you started immediately. Maya stood, leaving a tip that was larger than Jessica's weekly wages. And Jessica, when you're successful, and you will be, remember to look for the invisible people who need someone to see their potential. As they left the restaurant, Carlo slipped his hand into Maya's with the casual affection that had become natural over months of building their unconventional family. That was nice what you did for Jessica, he said. Is that part of being a queen, helping people who used to be like you? Maya squeezed his hand gently, thinking about the cyclical nature of power and responsibility. That's part of being human, Carlo. Queens just have more resources to help with. The drive home took them through neighbourhoods that told the story of Maya's transformation in reverse. From Little Italy, where she had once been invisible, through Chinatown, where she had survived on determination and stubborn hope, past the office buildings she had cleaned for minimum wage, finally arriving at the Westchester estate where she now ruled beside the man who had chosen to see her strength instead of her desperation. "Papa," Carlo said as they pulled through the security gates, "when my sister is born, will you tell her about today? About how Maya used to work at Giuseppe's and how she saved us that night?" "Every year on her birthday," Luca promised, his voice rough with emotion. "She'll know the whole story, how her mother was brave enough to protect strangers, strong enough to build a kingdom, and wise enough to use her power to help people who remind her of who she used to be." That evening, as Maya settled into her favourite chair in the library with a cup of tea and the latest reports from the Romano Foundation's various initiatives, she reflected on the strange circularity of returning to the place where her visible life had begun. Giuseppe's restaurant would always be sacred ground, the site of her first choice to step out of the shadows, the moment when she had decided that protection mattered more than self-preservation. But more than that, today had reminded her that transformation was not a destination, but a journey, that becoming visible was not the end goal, but the beginning of responsibility. She had power now, financial resources, political connections, the kind of influence that could reshape lives with a phone call or a written check. The question was how to use that power in service of something larger than her own security and happiness. Maya's hand moved to her belly, feeling the gentle flutter that meant her daughter was awake and active. This child would be born into a world where her mother's name was spoken with respect rather than ignored with indifference, where safety was assumed rather than fought for, where love was abundant rather than scarce. But Maya was determined that her daughter would also understand the responsibility that came with privilege, the obligation to see and help the invisible people who needed someone to recognize their potential. The baby growing inside her would know the story of the waitress who became a queen, and more importantly, would understand that true royalty was measured not by what you possessed, but by what you protected. Luca found her there an hour later, still lost in thought while Carlo practiced piano in the music room and Rocco maintained his faithful vigil by the fireplace. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her chair and placing his hand over hers on her rounded belly. "Just thinking about legacy," Maya replied, covering his hand with her free one. About what kind of world we're building for our children and whether we're using our advantages responsibly. You mean like offering life-changing opportunities to struggling college students who remind you of your former self? Luca's smile was understanding, proud. Maya, you've built something remarkable with the foundation. You've used legitimate power to create legitimate change for people who need help the most. Maya leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that we're really here, really safe, really building something lasting, instead of just surviving day to day. It's real, Luca assured her, his voice carrying absolute conviction. And it's permanent. You've made yourself indispensable, not just to me personally, but to the organization as a whole. The legitimate businesses generate more profit than our traditional operations ever did, and your reputation ensures that no one challenges our territory. Maya smiled at the clinical assessment, understanding that Luca's love for her was inseparable from his respect for her capabilities. She had become his equal partner not just through marriage but through demonstrated competence, proven loyalty, and the kind of strategic thinking that had transformed the Romano organization from criminal enterprise into something approaching respectability. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying 8 months of accumulated gratitude for the man who had seen her potential when she was invisible to everyone else. "I love you too, Maya Romano," he replied, kissing her with the tenderness of someone who had learned not to take such moments for granted. "My queen, my partner, the mother of my children." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their shared library, watching the rain streak the windows while their son practiced Chopin in the next room, Maya understood that she had achieved something she had never allowed herself to dream of. Not just visibility, but legitimacy. Not just survival, but sovereignty. Not just love, but legacy. The invisible waitress was gone forever, replaced by a woman who used power to protect rather than simply to survive. And tomorrow, Maya Romano would continue the work of ruling wisely, loving fiercely, and ensuring that the kingdom she had helped build would be worthy of the children who would inherit it. The transformation was complete. The crown fit perfectly, and in a small restaurant in Little Italy, a young woman named Jessica was calling her mother to share the news that her life had just changed forever. Because sometimes invisible people were seen by queens who remembered what it meant to need salvation. The circle was complete, but the story would continue for generations. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, cutting through the peaceful silence of the Romano estate like a blade through silk. Maya woke instantly, her hand moving to the secure phone on her nightstand with the muscle memory of someone who had learned that middle-of-the-night communications rarely brought good news. "Maya Romano," she answered, her voice clear and alert despite being pulled from deep sleep. "Mrs. Romano, this is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. We need to meet immediately. There's been a development that affects your family's security." The federal agent's voice carried urgency, layered with something that sounded suspiciously like concern. "Can you be at the Westchester field office in 2 hours?" Maya felt ice form in her veins as she processed the implications of a pre-dawn call from federal law enforcement. Beside her, Luca was already awake, his dark eyes alert and focused as he tracked her side of the conversation. "What kind of development?" Maya asked, swinging her legs out of bed with the careful movements of someone 7 months pregnant. "The kind that requires immediate action and absolute discretion." Agent Chen paused, then added with unmistakable gravity, "Mrs. Romano, someone has put a federal contract on your family. We have 48 hours to neutralize the threat before it goes operational." Maya's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly, where her daughter was growing in the sanctuary that had suddenly become a target zone. "We'll be there in 90 minutes. After ending the call, Maya turned to find Luca already moving toward their walk-in closet. his movements carrying the controlled urgency of someone shifting from husband and father into the mode that had kept him alive in a world where survival required constant vigilance. "Federal contract," Maya said, the words carrying weight that needed no elaboration. "Vincent Torino," Luca replied grimly, pulling on clothes chosen for function rather than fashion. "Son of a bitch must have made connections in federal prison. The only question is whether this is revenge or business." Maya dressed quickly in maternity clothes that had been specially tailored to accommodate both her pregnancy and the reality that she might need to access weapons quickly. The shoulder holster felt awkward against her changed silhouette, but the weight of the Glock 19 remained comfortingly familiar. "Carlo?" she asked. "Safe house protocol," Luca said immediately. "Tony's already moving him to Connecticut with full protection detail. Our son will be in a fortress until this is resolved." 20 minutes later, they were driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward a meeting that would determine whether the peaceful life they had built could survive federal attention of the most dangerous kind. Maya used the travel time to run through tactical assessments, considering contingencies and escape routes with the methodical precision that had once kept her alive in Afghanistan. The FBI field office in White Plains was a monument to bureaucratic functionality, glass and steel, designed to project authority while revealing nothing about the work conducted inside. Agent Chen met them in the lobby, her professional demeanour unable to completely mask what appeared to be genuine concern for their welfare. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Chen said, as she escorted them through security checkpoints and into a conference room that spoke of serious federal business. "What I'm about to share with you is classified intelligence that could get people killed if it reaches the wrong ears." Maya settled into a chair that had been positioned to accommodate her pregnancy, while Luca remained standing, his posture radiating the controlled tension of a predator assessing threats. "Vincent Torino has been in communication with a federal prosecutor named Marcus Webb," Agent Chen began, opening a file that contained photographs and documents marked with various levels of security classification. "Webb has been building a RICO case against your organization for 18 months, but he lacks the evidence needed for indictments that would survive court challenges." "So he's made a deal with Vincent," Luca said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who understood how federal prosecutions really worked. "Worse, Webb has convinced Vincent to provide testimony in exchange for witness protection and early release." Agent Chen's expression was grim as she pulled out surveillance photographs that showed Vincent in conversation with federal officials. "But Webb wants more than just testimony. He wants to provoke your organization into actions that would provide evidence of ongoing criminal activity." Maya felt her blood turn cold as the implications became clear. "He's using Vincent as bait. Vincent's been authorized to contract hits on your family members with the understanding that your response will provide evidence of your organization's willingness to use violence to protect its interests." Agent Chen met Maya's gaze directly. "Mrs. Romano, you and your children are federal bait in a prosecution strategy that treats civilian casualties as acceptable losses." The silence that followed was heavy with implications that went far beyond personal threat. Maya understood that they were facing something more complex than traditional criminal rivalry. They were targets in a federal prosecution strategy that had weaponized their love for each other. "Why are you telling us this?" Luca asked quietly. Agent Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Because what happened at the Meridian Hotel proved something that my investigation had already suggested. You're not the criminals Webb thinks you are. Your legitimate businesses employ over 3,000 people. Your foundation has donated $40 million to hospitals and schools. Your organization hasn't been involved in traditional criminal activities for over 2 years." Maya studied the federal agent's face, recognizing the conflict of someone whose professional obligations were at war with her personal ethics. "But more than that," Agent Chen continued, "I've spent 6 months investigating your family, Mrs. Romano. I know about your military service, your mother's condition, the way you've transformed the Romano organization into something approaching respectability. I know that you're pregnant with a daughter who deserves to be born into safety rather than federal prosecution theatre. What are you proposing? Maya asked. Cooperation, full transparency about your legitimate business operations in exchange for federal protection from Webb's prosecution strategy. Agent Chen pulled out a document that had clearly been prepared in advance. You provide us with complete financial records, organizational charts, and operational procedures for Romano Enterprises. We provide you with intelligence about threats and a shield against prosecutions based on outdated assumptions about your activities. Maya and Luca exchanged glances, communicating without words about the implications of formal cooperation with federal law enforcement. It meant abandoning the last vestiges of traditional criminal activity, fully committing to legitimacy in ways that would be irreversible. And if we refuse? Luca asked. Then Vincent's contract goes operational in 40 hours, and my colleagues will investigate the resulting violence as evidence of ongoing criminal enterprise rather than federal entrapment. Agent Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. Mr. Romano, Mrs. Romano, I'm offering you a chance to protect your family while building something legitimate, but the window for cooperation closes when Vincent's people reach New York. Maya felt her daughter kick as if responding to the stress hormones flooding her system. She thought about Carlo, safely hidden in Connecticut, but living with the knowledge that his family was under constant threat. She thought about the legitimate businesses that employed thousands of people who had nothing to do with criminal activity. Most of all, she thought about the future she wanted to build for her children, one based on strength and legitimacy rather than violence and secrecy. What exactly would cooperation look like? Maya asked. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and began displaying organizational charts that showed the current structure of Romano Enterprises. Complete financial transparency, congressional testimony about organized crime's evolution into legitimate business, cooperation with ongoing investigations into other families who haven't made your transition to legitimacy. You want us to become witnesses, Luca said, his voice carrying the weight of someone recognizing the end of an era. I want you to become the example that proves organized crime can evolve beyond violence, Agent Chen replied. Mrs. Romano, your foundation's work could be a model for how former criminal organizations can contribute positively to society. Mr. Romano, your business empire could demonstrate that it's possible to build wealth through legitimate means rather than traditional criminal activities. Maya thought about the choice being offered: complete legitimacy in exchange for complete transparency, federal protection in exchange for federal cooperation. It meant abandoning the last connections to Luca's criminal past while fully embracing a future built on business acumen rather than intimidation. I need to speak with my husband privately, Maya said finally. Agent Chen nodded and left them alone in the conference room, where Maya and Luca faced the most important decision of their marriage. This changes everything, Luca said quietly. Full cooperation means testifying against people I've known for decades, destroying relationships that go back to childhood, becoming the kind of witness that traditional families eliminate without hesitation. It also means Carlo grows up without constantly looking over his shoulder, Maya replied. It means our daughter is born into genuine safety rather than carefully managed danger. It means the empire you've built can continue growing without federal prosecution hanging over everything we do. Luca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the surveillance photographs that showed the threats gathering around their carefully constructed life. Elena always said she wanted Carlo to be proud of his father's work, he said finally. She wanted him to grow up in a world where the Romano name meant respect earned through achievement rather than fear imposed through violence. Maya reached across the table to take his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of his journey from criminal enforcer to legitimate businessman. What do you want, Luca? Not for the organization, not for tradition, but for our family. I want our children to sleep safely. I want to build something they can inherit without shame. I want you to be able to use your gifts to help people rather than constantly having to protect us from the consequences of my choices." Luca's voice was rough with emotion. "Maya, I want to be worthy of the faith you showed when you chose to love a man like me." When Agent Chen returned, Maya and Luca were ready with their answer. "We'll cooperate," Maya said simply. "Full transparency, complete records, congressional testimony, whatever you need to prove that organized crime can evolve beyond violence." Agent Chen's smile was genuine, relieved. "Mrs. Romano, you've just made a decision that will reshape federal law enforcement's understanding of how criminal organizations can be transformed rather than simply destroyed." The next 6 hours were spent in detailed negotiations about the scope and limitations of their cooperation. Maya's military intelligence background proved invaluable in understanding the nuances of federal witness protection, while Luca's business acumen helped structure agreements that would protect their legitimate enterprises while providing the transparency federal investigators required. By noon, they had signed documents that formally ended the Romano family's connection to traditional organized crime, while beginning their new role as federal witnesses in prosecutions targeting families who hadn't made their transition to legitimacy. "Vincent's contract is being terminated," Agent Chen announced as they concluded the paperwork. "Webb's prosecution strategy has been suspended pending review of his methods. Your family is under federal protection until the immediate threats are neutralized." As they drove home through the autumn afternoon, Maya felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of their future. The constant vigilance, the careful assessment of threats, the weight of knowing that violence might erupt at any moment, all of it was finally ending. "Any regrets?" Luca asked, echoing the question Maya had posed months earlier. "None," Maya replied, her hand resting on her belly, where their daughter was growing in safety that was finally genuine rather than carefully maintained. "We're building something worthy of the children who will inherit it." That evening, as they welcomed Carlo home from his temporary exile and explained the new realities of their transformed life, Maya understood that they had achieved something remarkable: complete legitimacy earned through strength rather than granted through luck. The Romano organization would continue to grow and prosper, but now it would do so with federal blessing rather than federal persecution. Maya's foundation would expand its work with congressional support rather than bureaucratic suspicion. Carlo and his sister would grow up proud of their family name rather than burdened by its criminal associations. Maya Romano, former invisible waitress, former combat medic, current federal witness and legitimate businesswoman, had completed the most complex transformation imaginable, from criminal organization queen to respectable society leader, without losing the strength that had made the transition possible. The crown had evolved, but it still fit perfectly, and tomorrow they would begin the work of building a kingdom worthy of the peace they had finally achieved. 2 years after Maya Romano had testified before Congress about the transformation of organized crime into legitimate enterprise, she stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, watching her husband deliver a keynote speech to the National Association of Children's Hospital Administrators. The woman reflected in the crystal chandeliers bore no resemblance to the invisible waitress who had once served tables for survival. Designer Saint Laurent gown in midnight blue, diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, the unmistakable aura of someone who commanded respect through achievement rather than fear. But it was the 18-month-old girl sleeping peacefully in her arms that represented the true measure of Maya's transformation. Isabella Romano had been born into a world where her mother's name opened doors to boardrooms and congressional hearings, where safety was assumed rather than fought for, where love was abundant rather than scarce. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luca's voice carried easily across the ballroom, addressing an audience of medical professionals and philanthropists who had gathered to discuss innovations in pediatric trauma care. "When my wife first proposed the Meridian Foundation's Trauma Response Initiative, I thought we were simply funding better equipment and training. I didn't understand that we were actually investing in hope itself. Maya smiled at the way Luca had learned to speak the language of legitimate philanthropy, his natural authority now channeled into building rather than intimidating. The man who had once ruled through fear had become someone who inspired through vision, his criminal past transformed into business acumen that served the greater good. The statistics are remarkable, Luca continued, consulting notes that Maya had helped him prepare. 18 new pediatric trauma centres opened in 3 states, response times reduced by an average of 40%. Survival rates improved by nearly 30% for children experiencing severe medical emergencies. Isabella stirred in Maya's arms, her dark eyes opening to focus on her mother, with the absolute trust that came from knowing she was completely safe and utterly loved. At 18 months, she was already showing signs of the Romano intelligence and stubborn independence, crawling with determined precision, babbling in what sounded suspiciously like commands, studying the world with the intense focus that marked her as someone who would grow up expecting to be taken seriously. But more than statistics, Luca said, his voice warming as his gaze found Maya and Isabella in the audience. This foundation has given my family something we thought was impossible, the ability to build a legacy based on healing rather than harm, creation rather than destruction, hope rather than fear. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she thought about the journey that had brought them from that violent night at Giuseppe's restaurant to this moment of public recognition for their charitable work. The Romano Foundation had become one of the most respected philanthropic organisations in the country, their contributions to children's hospitals and educational programmes drawing praise from politicians and medical professionals who had no idea their donations came from an organisation that had once operated outside the law. Maya Romano revolutionised our understanding of trauma-informed care, Dr. Sarah Patterson was saying as she introduced the evening's final speaker. Maya had been so lost in reflection that she had missed her own introduction, but Isabella's cheerful babbling of "Mama, Mama" made it clear that her moment had arrived. Maya handed Isabella to Luca, accepting his kiss, and whispered, "You're incredible," before making her way to the podium. The applause was warm, genuine, the kind of recognition that came from people who respected her work rather than feared her capabilities. "Thank you," Maya began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to command attention through competence rather than violence. 2.5 years ago, I was working 3 minimum-wage jobs just to keep my mother in the care facility she needed. I was invisible to most of the world, surviving day to day without any hope of building something lasting. The audience was quiet, attentive, drawn in by Maya's directness and the obvious sincerity of her words. Everything changed the night I chose to protect a child from violence, not because I expected reward or recognition, but because some things are worth risking everything to defend. Maya's gaze found the table where 9-year-old Carlo sat with Tony and Rosa, his serious face glowing with pride at his mother's public recognition. That choice led me to a family I never expected, a love I thought was impossible, and opportunities I could never have imagined. Maya paused, collecting her thoughts as she looked out over an audience that included senators, medical professionals, business leaders, and philanthropists who hung on her every word. But the most important thing that choice taught me was this: visibility is not about being seen, it's about choosing to see others. Power is not about commanding fear, it's about inspiring hope. Legacy is not about what you accumulate, it's about what you create that outlasts your own life. The applause was thunderous, but Maya barely heard it. Her attention was focused on her family, Luca holding Isabella with the tender strength that had first captured her heart, Carlo applauding with the enthusiasm of a child who understood that his mother was someone special, the extended family of friends and colleagues who had become part of their chosen tribe. After the formal dinner concluded, Maya found herself in the plaza's private garden with agent Sarah Chen, who had become both professional ally and unexpected friend over the months of their cooperation with federal law enforcement. "Quite a journey from that hospital room in Mount Sinai," Agent Chen observed, watching Isabella toddle between the garden benches with the fearless confidence of a child who had never known danger. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real," Maya admitted, keeping pace with her daughter's exploration while scanning the environment with the automatic vigilance that had never fully disappeared. 2 years ago, we were targets in a federal prosecution. Tonight, we're being honoured for our contributions to society. "You earned that transformation," Agent Chen said firmly. "The testimony you and Luca provided helped us restructure our entire approach to organised crime prosecution. Instead of simply destroying criminal organisations, we now have models for how they can be transformed into legitimate enterprises that contribute to their communities." Maya thought about the congressional hearings where she had testified about the Romano organisation's evolution, the closed-door sessions with federal prosecutors who were learning to distinguish between criminal enterprises that could be reformed and those that had to be eliminated. Her military background and business education had made her an ideal witness, someone who could explain complex organisational transformations in terms that lawmakers and law enforcement could understand. "What's next for your family?" Agent Chen asked. "Expansion," Maya replied, watching Isabella attempt to climb a garden bench with the determination that marked her as her father's daughter. Luca's been invited to speak at the Harvard Business School about legitimate business development in post-criminal organizations. I'm considering a position with the State Department's International Development Program. They want someone with my background to consult on economic transformation initiatives in post-conflict regions. Agent Chen's eyebrows rose at the mention of State Department work. "From waitress to federal consultant? That's quite an evolution." "From invisible to indispensable," Maya corrected with a smile. "Though I'll always remember what it felt like to be overlooked, to be desperate, to need someone to see my potential instead of just my circumstances." Their conversation was interrupted by Carlo's appearance in the garden, his 9-year-old face serious with the kind of responsibility he had inherited from both his parents. "Maya, Isabella's getting tired," he announced, scooping up his sister with the practised ease of a devoted big brother. "And Papa says the car is ready whenever you are." Maya watched Carlo settle Isabella against his shoulder, noting the way the little girl immediately relaxed into his protective embrace. At 9, Carlo had become the kind of boy who noticed when others needed help, who protected those smaller than himself, who understood that strength was meant to serve something larger than personal ambition. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Maya asked, stroking Isabella's dark hair. "Mama home," Isabella agreed sleepily, her vocabulary limited, but her meaning clear. As they drove through Manhattan toward the Westchester estate, Maya reflected on the concept of home and how dramatically its meaning had evolved over the past 3 years. Home was no longer a cramped studio apartment where she survived between shifts. Home was not just the luxury estate where they lived safely behind security gates. Home was this, the space between herself and the people she had chosen to love, the invisible sanctuary that travelled with them wherever they went. "Good speech tonight," Luca said, reaching across the car's interior to take her hand. "Though I think you made half the audience cry when you talked about choosing to see others." "It's true, though. Everything we have now started with you choosing to see me instead of just another service worker." Maya squeezed his hand, feeling the wedding ring that had become as natural as breathing. "And it continues with us choosing to see people like Jessica, like the scholarship recipients, like everyone who's still invisible and waiting for someone to recognise their potential." Carlo looked up from the book he was reading by the car's interior light. "Maya, my teacher says the Romano Foundation Scholarship Program is being copied by other organisations across the country. Is that true?" "It's true," Maya confirmed. "Sometimes the best way to change the world is to prove that change is possible." "Good," Carlo said with the matter-of-fact certainty that had become his signature. Invisible people deserve to be seen. The estate appeared ahead of them, its windows glowing with warm light that promised safety, comfort, and the kind of domestic peace that Maya had once thought was reserved for other people's lives. As they pulled through the security gates that no longer felt like barriers, but like boundaries that protected what was precious, Maya understood that she had achieved something beyond her wildest dreams, not just visibility, but legitimacy, not just survival, but sovereignty, not just love, but legacy. Isabella was asleep in her car seat, her small face peaceful in the dashboard light. She would grow up knowing that her mother was someone important, someone respected, someone who had built a foundation that helped children across the country receive medical care they might not otherwise afford. But more than that, she would grow up understanding that importance came from service, that respect was earned through achievement, that power was meaningful only when it was used to protect and uplift others. Home, Isabella murmured in her sleep, the single word carrying all the security and love that Maya had fought to provide. As they settled into the evening routines that had become sacred, baths and stories and the careful ritual of ensuring everyone was safe and loved before sleep claimed the household, Maya thought about the circular nature of transformation and how far they had all travelled from that night when an invisible waitress had chosen to become visible by protecting someone else's child. Carlo was reading to Isabella from a picture book about brave princesses and noble knights, his voice gentle and patient as he helped his sister understand that stories could teach important lessons about courage and kindness. Isabella listened with the intense focus that suggested she was already learning that books contained adventures worth pursuing. "Maya," Carlo said as she tucked him into bed, "when Isabella is old enough to understand, will you tell her the real story about that night at Giuseppe's? About how you saved us by being brave when you were scared?" Every year on her birthday, Maya promised, the same commitment Luca had made months ago. She'll know the whole story, how her mother was invisible until she chose to be seen, how love sometimes requires courage, how families are built by people who choose to protect each other. Carlo nodded seriously, then surprised her with a question that spoke to the depth of his understanding. "Maya, do you think Isabella will have to be brave like you were? Or do you think we've made the world safe enough that she can just be happy?" Maya sat on the edge of his bed, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. "I think she'll have her own kind of courage to show, Carlo. Maybe not the kind that requires protecting people from violence, but the kind that builds things worth protecting, the kind that sees people who need help and figures out how to provide it." "Good," Carlo said, settling into his pillows with the satisfaction of someone whose worldview had been confirmed. "I want to teach her to be strong, but I also want her to know she's safe." After ensuring that both children were settled for the night, Maya found Luca in his study, reviewing architectural plans for the Romano Foundation's newest project, a pediatric trauma centre that would serve 3 counties in upstate New York. "Busy day tomorrow?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Congressional hearing about federal funding for rural hospitals," Luca replied, looking up from blueprints that represented hope made concrete. "Senator Morrison wants me to testify about public-private partnerships in underserved communities." Maya smiled at the casual way Luca now referenced congressional testimony, as though addressing federal lawmakers about policy initiatives was simply part of his routine responsibilities. From criminal organization boss to federal policy consultant, Elena would be amazed by how far you've come. "She'd be amazed by how far we've all come," Luca corrected, moving around the desk to settle beside her chair. "Maya, 3 years ago I was a man who had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. Tonight I watched my wife receive recognition from the country's leading medical professionals for work that's saving children's lives across multiple states." Maya leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid comfort of his presence and the security that came from building something lasting together. "What do you think happens next?" "Next, we keep building. Keep proving that transformation is possible, that people can evolve beyond their worst choices, that love really is stronger than fear." Luca's voice carried the conviction of someone who had learned these lessons through lived experience rather than theoretical understanding. Next, we make sure our children inherit a world that's better than the one we found. As they settled into bed in the master bedroom that had once been a monument to loss but was now a sanctuary of hope, Maya reflected on the strange circularity of her journey from invisible to visible and back to a different kind of visibility, the kind that came from being seen for contributions rather than survival, for building rather than enduring, for loving rather than simply not dying. Maya Chen Romano, former combat medic, former invisible waitress, current federal witness, current foundation director, current mother and wife and queen of a legitimate empire built on the ruins of a criminal organization, closed her eyes and felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had not just survived, but triumphed. The transformation was complete, but the story would continue through the children who would inherit not just wealth and position, but the understanding that true power came from service, that real strength was measured by what you protected rather than what you possessed, that the most important victories were the ones that made other people's victories possible. In the nursery down the hall, Isabella Romano slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams came to children who had never known fear, who had always been safe, who would grow up understanding that their mother was someone worth emulating, not because she had killed to protect them, but because she had chosen to live in service of something larger than herself. The invisible waitress was gone forever, replaced by a woman whose visibility served others rather than just herself. The Queen had not just claimed her crown, but had redefined what royalty meant in a world where power could be used to heal rather than harm. Maya Romano slept deeply, surrounded by the love she had earned and the security she had built, dreaming of the hospitals that would open, the children who would be saved, the invisible people who would become visible because someone with power had chosen to see them. The circle was complete, but the story would echo through generations of children who would know that courage, kindness, and the choice to see others were the true measures of a life worth living. Long live the Queen, long live the legacy, long live the love that had transformed everything it touched. The transformation was complete, but the impact would be eternal.